My son-in-law had no idea I was the anonymous founder and majority shareholder of the very corporation he was just appointed to run. To him, I was just his wife's aging father, a simple black man in a faded flannel shirt who drove a beaten-up truck. So when he and his pretentious parents invited me to a high-end French restaurant, I accepted. I wanted to see exactly how they treated a man they believed had nothing. I sat quietly as they slid a thick envelope across the table trying to buy my absence from the biggest corporate gala of the year. They thought they had won. But before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe arrogance always comes with a heavy price. My name is Garrett Cole. I am 69 years old and I know the exact weight of a dollar earned through sweat and blood. I built my fortune from the ground up. Decades ago, I started a small logistics firm with a single truck. I worked 18-hour days sacrificing sleep and comfort until that single truck became a fleet, and that fleet became Apex Holdings. Today, Apex is a corporate titan, but I never let the money change my soul. I refuse to become one of those hollow men who wear $1,000 suits to hide their insecurities. I chose to live quietly. I stayed in my comfortable wooden cabin by the lake. I kept driving my dependable 2004 Ford truck. I wore my familiar work boots and flannel shirts because they reminded me of where I came from. My daughter Camille was my absolute world. She grew up to be a brilliant pediatrician, a woman of deep compassion. When she brought Bradley Sutton home, my instincts flared. Bradley was a textbook corporate climber armed with an Ivy League degree and a smile that never reached his cold eyes. But Camille loved him deeply. Against my better judgment, I wanted to ensure her happiness. Using my anonymous founder status, I orchestrated a silent vote. I guided the board of directors to appoint Bradley as the new chief executive officer of Apex Solutions just 6 months ago. I handed him the keys to my kingdom so he could provide my daughter with a secure life. I expected gratitude. I expected hard work. Instead, the sudden power mutated him into a monster of arrogance. The invitation to dine at Le Petit Palais arrived abruptly. It was the most exclusive French restaurant in the city, a place where the chandeliers cost more than a family home and the menus did not display prices. I pulled my rusty truck up to the valet stand. The attendant stared at me with undisguised confusion, his hands hesitating before taking my keys. I walked into the opulent dining room wearing my clean but worn corduroy pants and a simple plaid shirt. The maitre d' looked at me as if I had just tracked mud across his pristine marble floor. He reluctantly led me to a secluded private table near the back. Bradley was already seated. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit that practically screamed new money. Next to him sat his parents Thomas and Patricia Sutton. Thomas flashed a bulky gold watch and Patricia dripped in oversized pearls. My financial advisors had already run a quiet background check on the Sutton family. I knew they were drowning in suffocating debt, living entirely on maxed-out credit cards and empty prestige. Yet as I approached the table, they stared at me with pure disdain. "Garrett, glad you could find the place," Bradley said. He did not stand up. He did not offer his hand. I pulled out my own chair and sat down. Patricia immediately wrinkled her nose, her eyes sweeping over my flannel shirt with harsh judgment. "I suppose dress codes are merely historical suggestions these days," she murmured to Thomas, making sure her voice carried across the table. "You would think a person would put in a little effort for an establishment like this. It is about respecting the ambiance." I unfolded my linen napkin and placed it on my lap. "I am a simple man, Patricia. I prefer comfort over pretense." Thomas cleared his throat loudly, adjusting his silk tie. "Let us skip the pleasantries and get straight to the business at hand, Garrett. Bradley is a very important man now. As the CEO of Apex Solutions, he carries a massive responsibility. He has an elite image to uphold. The corporation is hosting its 30th anniversary gala next weekend at the Waldorf Astoria. The entire board of directors will be there along with the wealthiest investors in the country. It is the most critical night of his career." I looked calmly at Bradley. "I am aware of the gala. Camille mentioned she bought a beautiful black dress for it. I was planning to escort her to the ballroom while you handle your executive duties." Bradley slammed his crystal water glass down on the table. Water spilled over the edge. "That is exactly the problem, Garrett. You absolutely cannot be there." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my breathing perfectly steady. "I cannot attend my own daughter's corporate event." "You do not fit in, Garrett." Patricia snapped, her voice sharp and venomous. "Look at you. Look at the way you carry yourself. You are a blue-collar man. These people are elites. Bradley cannot be seen introducing a man in work boots and flannel to the board of directors. It would completely humiliate him. It makes him look like he comes from the gutter. He needs to project an image of generational wealth and power. I shifted my gaze to my son-in-law. Bradley, is this how you feel? Do you think I am a humiliation to your image? Bradley did not flinch. He looked me dead in the eye. Be realistic, Garrett. You do not know how to talk to these people. You do not know which fork to use. You will embarrass Camille, and you will destroy my credibility with the shareholders. I need them to see me as a peer, not as a charity case who married into a working-class family. You staying home is what is best for everyone. Thomas reached into his tailored jacket pocket. He pulled out a crisp white envelope and slid it slowly across the polished mahogany table. It stopped right next to my empty plate. We know you live on a fixed retirement income, Thomas said with a sickeningly sweet tone. There is a certified check for $10,000 in that envelope. Think of it as a generous early retirement bonus. Take the money, Garrett. Book a nice fishing trip. Go down to the coast. Go anywhere you want next weekend. Just make sure it is far away from the Waldorf Astoria and the Apex Gala. I stared down at the white envelope. $10,000. These hollow, debt-ridden fools were trying to bribe the majority shareholder of a billion-dollar corporation to stay away from his own company's anniversary gala. They were using money they did not even truly own to purchase my absence. I felt a cold, hard knot form deep in my chest. My hands remained perfectly steady on the table. I did not yell. I did not throw my glass in Bradley's arrogant face. Anger is a cheap, uncontrollable emotion. Strategy is priceless. I looked back at Bradley. His eyes held absolutely no remorse. He was entirely consumed by a desperate need to protect his fragile, fabricated image. He was ashamed of me. He was ashamed of the father of the woman who shared his bed. He viewed me as a pathetic old man who could be easily bought and dismissed. I slowly reached out and picked up the envelope. I did not open it. I simply slid it into the breast pocket of my faded flannel shirt. I understand your position perfectly, I said in a quiet, even voice. Enjoy your dinner. I stood up, pushed my heavy chair in, and turned away. I walked out of the elegant dining room without looking back. I could practically feel their smug smiles burning into my back as I left. They thought they had won. They thought they had just purchased their peace of mind and secured their elite status. They had absolutely no idea they had just bought their own destruction. As I stepped out into the cool night air and handed my ticket to the valet, my mind was already working. I had given Bradley the world and he had chosen to spit on it. Now I was going to take it all back, every single piece of it. The valet handed me the keys to my 2004 Ford truck with a look of barely concealed relief. I tipped him a crisp $20 bill, proving that class is not dictated by the car you drive or the suit you wear. I climbed into the worn leather seat and shut the heavy door, sealing out the noise of the city and the suffocating arrogance of the restaurant. The silence inside the cabin was absolute. I did not hit the steering wheel. I did not shout into the dark void. Anger is a luxury reserved for the powerless. Men with real power do not throw tantrums. They dismantle their enemies, brick by brick. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the truck. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang exactly twice before a sharp, fully awake voice answered on the other end. Jonathan Pierce is a 50-year-old legal predator disguised in bespoke Italian suits. As a senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate law firms in the country, he handles the shadows of my empire. We go way back. I pulled him out of a crumbling firm 20 years ago and made him my chief counsel. He owes me his career and I trust him with my life. He is the only man besides my private banker who knows that Garrett Cole, the man living in a wooden cabin, is the anonymous titan behind Apex Holdings. Garrett Jonathan said, his voice crisp and alert. It is 9 o'clock on a Friday night. Tell me you are not calling to discuss quarterly projections. I am calling to initiate a full forensic audit. I replied, my voice as cold as the winter air outside. Jonathan paused. I could hear the subtle shift in his breathing over the line. He instantly transitioned from a casual friend to a legal shark. On which division? Not a division, Jonathan. A person. I need a comprehensive invasive background check on Bradley Sutton. Leave no stone unturned. I want his personal bank statements, his credit history, his offshore accounts, his emails, and his daily schedule. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and who he calls at midnight. There was a heavy, loaded silence on the line. Garrett Bradley is the chief executive officer of your company. He is also your son-in-law. This requires overriding extreme executive privacy protocols. You are asking me to tear apart his entire personal and professional life. The board of directors will get nervous if they catch wind of this. The shareholders will start asking dangerous questions. The board works for me, Jonathan. The shareholders exist because I allow them to. Bradley Sutton is not a king. He is an employee, and he just proved he is a massive liability to the culture and integrity of my company. He just tried to bribe me with $10,000 to stay away from the 30th anniversary gala next weekend. He thinks I am a broke, uneducated old man who will stain his elite image. Jonathan let out a low, dangerous chuckle, the sound of a hunter spotting fresh prey. Oh, he made a fatal miscalculation. How fast do you want the data? I want the preliminary financial report by tomorrow morning. I also need you to activate my ultimate founder override access on the Apex corporate network. I want complete, unfiltered visibility into every internal communication Bradley has made since he took the corner office. Open the backdoor channels. I want to see his digital footprints. Consider it done, Jonathan replied smoothly. He poked a sleeping bear Garrett. I will make sure we have the trap completely set before he even realizes he is bleeding. Call me when you get to a secure terminal. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I turned the ignition. The old engine roared to life with a familiar, comforting rumble. I drove out of the city limits, heading toward the quiet sanctuary of my lake cabin. The road was empty, illuminated only by the headlights cutting through the heavy darkness. My mind was an intricate chessboard calculating moves, mapping out counter-moves, and anticipating every possible reaction. Bradley thought he held all the cards because he wore a title on his door and a custom suit on his back. He failed to realize that a title is nothing but a borrowed crown. True power does not need a label. It operates in the absolute silence, pulling the strings that make the puppets dance. As I gripped the steering wheel, a bitter wave of irony washed over me. Bradley Sutton walked around the Apex headquarters believing he was a self-made corporate genius. He boasted to anyone who would listen about his Ivy League pedigree and his aggressive business strategies. He thought his sheer brilliance had earned him the top spot. The truth was far more humiliating. I remembered the day Camille told me she was marrying him. We were sitting on the porch of my cabin. She talked endlessly about his ambition, his drive, his brilliant mind. She was completely blind to the hollow vanity beneath his polished surface. Fathers always know. We see the predator hiding behind the polite smile. But I chose to be a supportive father rather than a harsh judge. I wanted my little girl to be happy. 6 months ago, the board of directors was fully prepared to hire a seasoned executive from a rival tech giant to take over as CEO. Bradley was barely a mid-level vice president at the time. He was not even on the short list. I intervened. I sat in my cabin, logged into the secure board portal under my anonymous founder identifier, and cast my majority voting shares to crush the rival candidate. I manipulated the entire corporate hierarchy. I called in favors from silent partners. I pressured the chairman of the board to endorse a young, promising internal candidate. I literally rewrote the trajectory of a billion-dollar corporation just to see my daughter smile. I built his throne. I handed him the scepter. I gave him an empire on a silver platter so he could provide for her. I gave him the world, and his first instinct was to build a wall to keep me out of it. I pulled into the gravel driveway of my cabin. The night air was biting, but I did not feel the cold. I walked inside, tossed my keys on the counter, and pulled the crisp white envelope from my breast pocket. $10,000, a down payment on his own professional funeral. I placed it on the kitchen table and walked directly into my home office. I opened my laptop. The screen cast a pale blue light across the rustic wooden walls. I typed in the complex sequence of passwords, bypassing the standard employee gateways, diving deep into the mainframe architecture that I personally designed 30 years ago. The dashboard loaded flawlessly. It displayed the pulse of Apex Holdings, global revenue streams, market shares, real-time employee databases. I selected the Executive Surveillance tab. This was a digital failsafe I built to monitor the top brass. No one in the company knew it existed. It gave me God-level access to every keystroke made on a company device. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was an encrypted message from Jonathan. It was not even midnight yet, but he had already found a massive crack in the armor. Jonathan was a man who did not sleep when there was blood in the water. The message was brief, but it hit me like a physical sledgehammer. Garrett, you need to log into the secure portal immediately. Look at the financial ledgers. Bradley is not just an arrogant snob, he is moving company money, massive amounts, and it is going straight into an external trust fund. I stared at the glowing screen, my jaw clenching tight. The betrayal had just escalated from a pathetic family insult to a severe federal crime. Bradley had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He was not just disrespecting his father-in-law, he was actively stealing from my company. He was stealing from the employees who worked hard to build my legacy. I clicked the corresponding files Jonathan had flagged. My eyes scanned the digital ledgers. The numbers did not make sense at first glance, but the pattern was undeniable. Funds were being quietly siphoned away from secure accounts. I leaned back in my chair. I prepared to watch my arrogant son-in-law hang himself with the very rope I had graciously provided. I leaned closer to the monitor. The harsh blue light illuminated the dark lines of code and the complex financial jargon scrolling across my screen. The numbers on the executive dashboard were not just minor accounting irregularities or simple rounding errors. They were a blatant, arrogant declaration of systematic theft. My phone rang again, shattering the heavy, oppressive silence of the wooden cabin. It was Jonathan. I picked it up immediately, my eyes never leaving the flashing red anomalies on the surveillance portal. "You see it," Jonathan said. His voice was entirely stripped of any remaining professional detachment. He sounded like a man standing over a crime scene. He is not just padding his corporate expense account, Garrett. He is bleeding the entire company dry from the inside out. I watched the digital cursor blink steadily next to a highly classified routed transfer order. What exact fund is he hitting, Jonathan? Tell me he is not touching the emergency reserves. There was a sharp, ragged intake of breath on the other end of the encrypted line. It is significantly worse than the corporate reserves, Garrett. He is siphoning capital directly from the Apex employee pension tier, the primary retirement fund, the money meant for the warehouse workers, the truck drivers, and the logistics coordinators. My chest tightened instantly. A cold, absolute fury settled deep into my bones. Bradley Sutton, the man who just tried to pay me off with $10,000 to save his reputation, was funding his elite lifestyle by robbing the very people who built my empire. Give me the exact figures I commanded. My voice dropped an octave, carrying the weight of a judge about to deliver a death sentence. I want to know every single dime he has stolen since I allowed him to take the corner office 6 months ago. I heard the rapid, rhythmic clacking of Jonathan typing furiously on his secured terminal. Over the last 90 days, Bradley has initiated 7 distinct international wire transfers. He is using a dummy vendor account listed as Sutton Consulting Services. It is a classic textbook shell company. He authorizes massive consultation fees for logistical optimization, approves them himself using his top-tier executive clearance, and routes the capital straight out of the country to a shadow bank. The total amount stolen so far is just over $2.4 million. $2.4 million. The sheer audacity of his greed was almost impressive in its destructive scope. But a specific domestic transfer flagged by my surveillance system suddenly caught my eye. Jonathan, look at the outbound wire from last Tuesday. $500,000 was diverted from the shell company back onto domestic soil. Where did it go? Jonathan paused, his eyes likely scanning the complex digital trail. Give me a second. I am tracing the routing number through the clearinghouse. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Then Jonathan let out a sharp, cynical laugh. You are not going to believe this, Garrett. The $500,000 went directly into a joint escrow account held by Thomas and Patricia Sutton, his parents. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched so hard my teeth physically ached. What did they buy with it? Jonathan typed another quick command. It is a down payment. They just closed on a sprawling 6-bedroom beachfront mansion in the Hamptons. The property deed was officially signed 48 hours ago. The jagged pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. The custom charcoal suit, the massive gold watch, the oversized pearls draped around Patricia's neck, the crisp $10,000 check Thomas had so arrogantly slid across the polished mahogany table at Le Petit Palais just hours ago. They were putting on a pathetic theatrical show of generational wealth. They looked down their noses at my faded flannel shirt and my worn work boots. They treated me like a filthy peasant who had wandered into their royal court. Yet their entire existence of luxury was being funded by the stolen retirement money of my own employees. I did not shout. I did not slam my fist against the solid oak desk. I simply sat there in the dark, absorbing the profound depths of their spectacular stupidity. Bradley actually believed he was untraceable. He thought his Ivy League education made him legally and intellectually untouchable. He assumed the corporate structure of Apex Holdings was a labyrinth too complex for anyone to actively monitor. He had completely forgotten one crucial detail. Every digital wall, every financial protocol, and every security firewall in that building was designed and implemented by my architects. The $10,000 bribe currently sitting on my kitchen counter was essentially printed from the sweat of my own workforce. He was paying me to stay away from the 30th anniversary gala using money he stole from my house. His arrogance was blinding. He was so busy looking down at me that he never bothered to look up and see the guillotine swinging directly above his head. I pictured Thomas and Patricia clinking expensive champagne glasses in their newly purchased Hamptons mansion, celebrating their son's brilliant corporate success. They were leeches feeding off a host they openly despised. But parasites are incredibly easy to exterminate once you shine a blinding light directly on them. I reached out and traced the worn fabric of my flannel shirt. Patricia had called me a blue-collar embarrassment. She was absolutely right about one thing. I am a blue-collar man. And blue-collar men know exactly how to take out the trash. When I established the Apex employee pension tier 30 years ago, I made a silent, unbreakable vow. I remembered the grueling early days of driving 12 hours straight through freezing rain just to make a single delivery deadline. I remembered the toxic exhaust fumes, the aching muscles, and the constant suffocating fear of not making rent at the end of the month. I built that pension fund to ensure that no driver, no dispatcher, and no janitor at Apex would ever have to face their twilight years with an empty bank account. It was a sacred trust. It was the very backbone of my legacy. I intentionally structured the company so that the workers would always be financially protected before the executives collected their luxury bonuses. Bradley was not just stealing numbers from a sterile spreadsheet. He was actively destroying the future of hardworking families who depended on my word. He was stealing college tuitions, medical care, and peaceful retirements. He was dismantling the very soul of my corporation to fund his pathetic need for high society validation. "Do you want me to alert the federal authorities immediately?" Jonathan asked, breaking through my dark thoughts. "The Securities and Exchange Commission would lock him in a federal holding cell before sunrise. We have more than enough wire fraud evidence to put him away in a maximum security prison for 20 years. "No," I replied, my tone razor-sharp and entirely devoid of mercy. "Do not contact the authorities yet. If we arrest him tonight, the board of directors will panic and the stock will tank on Monday morning. Plus, a quiet, discreet arrest is far too merciful for a man like Bradley Sutton. He desperately wants to be the absolute center of attention at the Waldorf Astoria next weekend. He wants the world to see him shine. We are going to give him exactly what he wants. Let him keep the Hamptons house for a few more days. Let him spend the stolen money. We are going to publicly execute his career on his biggest night in front of everyone he wants to impress. I need you to silently draft the asset freeze orders and prepare the corporate indictments." Just then, an urgent red notification flashed across my secure surveillance dashboard. It bypassed the financial sector entirely and linked directly to Camille's personal trust fund interface. My blood ran completely cold. "Jonathan," I whispered, staring at the flashing red security alert. "Bradley is not done stealing. He is actively trying to breach Camille's private accounts right now." I closed my laptop. The time for sitting in the shadows was over. I closed my laptop. The time for sitting in the shadows was over. I grabbed my truck keys off the kitchen counter and walked out into the freezing night. The drive to Camille and Bradley's upscale suburban house took exactly 22 minutes. I broke the speed limit 3 times. My mind was a steel trap calculating every variable. Bradley was actively trying to breach Camille's private trust fund. He wanted absolute control over her financial independence to feed his escalating corporate theft. I pulled my battered Ford truck onto their pristine cobblestone driveway. The massive colonial house was brightly lit. I did not knock. I still had the emergency spare key Camille gave me 2 years ago. I unlocked the heavy oak door with absolute silence. The moment I stepped into the marble foyer, I heard his voice. It was not the polished, charismatic tone he used in boardrooms. It was a vicious, condescending snarl echoing from the formal dining room. I crept down the hallway, keeping my footsteps completely silent against the hardwood floor. I stopped just outside the dining room archway. Camille sat at the long glass table, her shoulders slumped, her hands trembling. She wore her blue medical scrubs, looking exhausted after a 12-hour shift at the pediatric ward. Bradley towered over her. He had several thick legal documents spread across the glass surface. He slammed his hand against the table, making Camille flinch. "You are being completely irrational," Camille Bradley hissed, his face flushed with anger. "I am the chief executive officer of a billion-dollar corporation. I handle massive global mergers every single day. Do you honestly think you are better equipped to manage this pathetic little trust fund your father set up? You are a doctor. You know absolutely nothing about asset consolidation." Camille stared down at the papers, a pen shaking in her right hand. "It is not about who is better equipped, Bradley. My father set this up for me when I was a baby. It is my safety net. Why do we need to move it into a joint account right now? We have plenty of money." Bradley leaned in close, his voice dripping with venomous manipulation. "Because marriage is a partnership, Camille. Are we partners or not? You keeping separate finances shows a fundamental lack of trust in my leadership. Do you know how humiliating it is for me to manage the Apex empire while my own wife hoards her little allowance like a paranoid child? Sign the transfer authorization. We need to consolidate our liquidity for the Hamptons investment. If you love me, you will sign it right now." I stood in the shadows, my blood turning to pure ice. He was actively gaslighting my daughter. He was using her exhaustion and her love to steal her security. I knew exactly what that trust fund represented. When Camille was born, I established an impenetrable financial fortress for her. It held over $50 million in diversified assets. I intentionally layered it behind blind trusts and corporate shields. To a greedy amateur like Bradley, the visible surface of the fund only showed about $300,000. He thought he was stealing a modest middle-class nest egg to cover his immediate debts and fund his fake aristocratic lifestyle. He had no idea he was trying to pick the lock on a vault that held more wealth than he would ever earn in his lifetime. I calculated my next move with lethal precision. If I walked into that room as the true founder of Apex Holdings, I could crush him instantly. I could reveal my identity, freeze his accounts, and throw him out of the house. But if I did that tonight, I would only save the money. I needed to save my daughter's mind. Camille still loved him. If I attacked him with corporate power right now, he would play the victim. He would tell her I was a controlling, tyrannical father ruining their marriage. She had to see the monster for herself. She had to witness his cruelty without any corporate masks. I had to protect the documents from being signed, but I had to do it as the pathetic, broken old man Bradley believed me to be. I quickly backed away into the kitchen. I grabbed a large ceramic mug from the drying rack. I filled it to the brim with scalding hot water from the digital dispenser. I let my shoulders droop. I relaxed my jaw and forced my eyes to look glassy and confused. I shuffled my feet, dragging my heavy work boots across the floor to make as much noise as possible. I stumbled into the dining room, holding the steaming mug with both hands, letting it shake visibly. "Camille," I mumbled, pitching my voice an octave higher, making it sound weak and disoriented. "Camille, sweetheart." I could not find the sugar. "The kitchen is all different." Bradley whipped around, his eyes widening in absolute fury. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" he roared. "How did you get in here?" Camille dropped the pen immediately and stood up. "Dad, what is wrong? Why are you here so late?" I ignored Bradley entirely. I shuffled directly toward the glass table, swaying on my feet. "I just wanted some tea, Camille. It is so cold outside. My truck makes a funny noise." I took another clumsy step forward. I intentionally caught the toe of my boot on the edge of the expensive Persian rug. I pitched forward with calculated momentum. I slammed my hands down onto the table. The ceramic mug shattered against the thick glass. The scalding water surged forward like a tidal wave. It completely flooded the legal documents. The thick ink of the transfer authorization instantly bled and ran, turning the crucial signature lines into a soggy, ruined mess. Bradley screamed. He lunged forward, desperately trying to salvage the soaked papers, but the boiling water had already destroyed them. The ink was completely illegible. The legal transfer was ruined. "You stupid, clumsy old fool," Bradley shouted, completely losing his temper. He grabbed my shoulder and shoved me backward with violent force. I let myself stumble, playing the part of the fragile old man perfectly. I hit the wall and slid down slightly, breathing heavily, looking up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Bradley, stop it!" Camille shrieked. She ran around the table and positioned herself directly between us. She pushed his chest, her eyes blazing with sudden, fierce, protective anger. "Do not ever put your hands on my father. Are you insane? Bradley was breathing hard, his face a mask of unfiltered rage. He pointed a trembling finger at the ruined documents. Look what he did, Camille. He ruined everything. He is losing his mind. He wanders into our house in the middle of the night babbling about sugar and destroys critical financial documents. He belongs in a facility, not wandering the streets. He is confused. Camille fired back, her voice shaking with emotion. He is an old man. He made a mistake. How can you be so cruel over a piece of paper? That piece of paper was our future, Bradley snapped, completely abandoning his loving husband persona. He is a liability. I told you this at the restaurant. He is a massive liability. I want him out of my house. Now. I looked up at Camille. I let a single tear form in my eye. I am sorry, sweetheart, I whispered, making my voice tremble. I just wanted some tea. I did not mean to make him mad. I will go. Camille knelt down next to me. Her hands hovered over my shoulders, her eyes searching my face for injuries. Dad, are you hurt? Did the water burn you? I am fine, I muttered slowly, pushing myself off the wall. I will go back to the cabin. I should not have come. Bradley crossed his arms over his chest, his eyes filled with pure disgust. Yes, you should leave. And do not ever use that spare key again. If you step foot in this house uninvited one more time, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Camille stood up slowly. She looked at Bradley as if she was seeing a complete stranger. The polished, charismatic CEO was gone. Standing in the dining room was a vicious, greedy thug who had just physically assaulted an elderly man over a ruined contract. I could see the exact moment the blindfold began to slip from her eyes. The seed of doubt had been firmly planted in her mind. I turned and shuffled toward the front door, keeping my head bowed in fake shame. Camille followed me out to the truck. She wrapped her arms around me in the freezing cold, apologizing repeatedly for her husband's behavior. I simply patted her back, playing the forgiving, simple father. Go back inside, Camille. Get some rest. You have a long shift tomorrow, I said softly. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. As I drove away from the sprawling colonial house, my posture instantly straightened. The confused, fragile expression vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, lethal resolve. The transfer documents were destroyed. Camille's trust fund was temporarily safe. More importantly, she had finally witnessed the true monster hiding behind Bradley's expensive suit. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I pressed the hands-free button on the dashboard. Garrett Jonathan's voice echoed through the cabin. The asset freeze orders are drafted. We are ready to strike the offshore accounts. Hold the strike. Jonathan Y. commanded, my eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. The board meeting is approaching. Bradley is going to try to secure his power before the gala. Monitor his communications with Thomas and Patricia. They are going to get desperate now that the trust fund money is out of reach. Let them scramble. The harder they panic, the faster they fall. The gravel crunched aggressively under the tires of a pristine white Mercedes-Benz, breaking the quiet sanctuary of my morning. I was sitting on my front porch whittling a piece of fallen pine when Thomas and Patricia Sutton stepped out into the crisp air. Patricia immediately covered her nose with a silk handkerchief. Her eyes scanned the rustic logs of my cabin as if she had just stepped into a toxic wasteland. She wore a tailored cream coat that likely cost more than the truck parked next to her. Thomas followed, stepping gingerly over a small puddle to protect his polished Italian loafers. They did not call ahead. They did not bother to knock. They simply invaded my property with the breathtaking entitlement of people who believed the world existed solely to serve them. I did not stand up to greet them. I kept my carving knife steady against the wood, shaving off a thin curl of pine. This place is entirely unsuitable for a man in your declining state, Patricia announced loudly. She did not bother with a good morning. She marched up the wooden steps and glared down at me, her shadow falling across my lap. We need to have a serious conversation about your immediate future, Garrett. Bradley told us about your little episode last night, wandering into their home in the dark, destroying highly important financial documents, babbling like a confused child. It is becoming a massive problem for our family. Thomas crossed his arms, standing shoulder to shoulder with his wife like a poorly dressed bouncer. You are becoming a dangerous burden to Camille Garrett. She is a doctor working long shifts at the hospital. She cannot be expected to babysit a senile father who breaks into her house and throws tantrums. And more importantly, Bradley is the chief executive officer of Apex Solutions. He is managing global assets and leading thousands of employees. He cannot have his focus derailed by domestic emergencies caused by your deteriorating mental faculties. He needs peace to operate at an elite level. I set my knife down on the small wooden table next to my rocking chair. I looked up at them, keeping my expression perfectly blank. And what exactly is your proposed solution to my declining state, Thomas? You need to sell this shack, Thomas stated with absolute authority. We have already taken the liberty of researching a premier assisted living facility a few hours upstate. It is discreet, it is highly secure, and it will keep you safely out of Bradley and Camille's way. If you sell this land, the proceeds will cover your first few years of basic care. We are giving you a choice, Garrett. You can go quietly, or Bradley will be forced to take legal action to protect Camille from your erratic behavior. He will hire physicians to evaluate you. He will have you declared legally incompetent and take control of your estate anyway. Do not make this harder than it has to be. My heart beat with a slow, methodical rhythm. They were standing on land that I owned outright, threatening to lock me in an asylum using the very corporate power I had bestowed upon their son. They were treating me like a stray dog that needed to be put down for the convenience of their social calendar. They assumed my silence was fear. They had no idea it was the calculating quiet of a predator waiting for the perfect strike. I did not raise my voice. I slowly reached into the breast pocket of my faded flannel shirt. My fingers brushed against the cold metallic edge of my digital recording device. I had anticipated a move like this since I left Camille's house last night. I slid the activation switch upward. A tiny silent vibration against my chest confirmed it was recording every single syllable they spoke. I let my shoulders slump forward, physically shrinking my presence. I stared at the wooden floorboards, mimicking the posture of a defeated, terrified old man who had run out of options. I am just trying to live my life in peace, I murmured. I pitched my voice to sound weak and shaky, forcing a slight tremor into my hands. I do not want to be a burden to my daughter. But assisted living is incredibly expensive. You know I live on a fixed income. I do not have much to my name. Patricia let out a sharp, condescending laugh. That is precisely why you need to sell this property, she sneered, adjusting her oversized pearl necklace. You working-class people never plan for the future. You live paycheck to paycheck, completely blind to the reality of the world, and then expect your successful children to foot the bill when you fall apart. Look at Thomas and me. We planned. We invested wisely. We just closed on a breathtaking 6-bedroom estate in the Hamptons. We secured our future through smart financial maneuvers and high society networking, not by clinging to a rotting cabin in the woods. I looked up, feigning innocent awe and wide-eyed curiosity. The Hamptons. That is incredible. That must have cost an absolute fortune. How did you manage such a massive cash purchase in this economy? Thomas puffed out his chest, his inflated ego completely overriding any basic sense of legal caution. We raised a brilliant son, Garrett. Bradley understands how to leverage massive corporate capital. He structured an incredibly lucrative consulting deal through a private vendor account. He funneled massive logistical optimization dividends directly into our family trust. It was a flawless $500,000 maneuver executed entirely legally through Apex channels. That is the difference between our family and yours. We know how to generate and protect real wealth. You just sit here whittling wood and waiting for a handout. The audio recorder in my pocket captured the exact undeniable confession I needed. Thomas had just proudly admitted to receiving the embezzled $500,000 from Bradley's fake consulting firm. He openly tied the stolen Apex pension funds directly to their Hamptons estate on a crystal-clear digital track. In his arrogant desperation to prove his superiority, he had willingly handed me the rope to hang them all. You have until Monday to sign the property listing agreement, Patricia demanded. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger inches from my face. If you refuse, Bradley will initiate the medical proxy paperwork immediately. He will cut off your access to Camille. Do not force his hand, Garrett. You will lose your daughter, your home, and your dignity. They turned around and marched back to their pristine Mercedes, utterly convinced of their absolute victory. I watched them drive away, the gravel kicking up in a cloud of dust behind their tires. I reached into my pocket and stopped the recording. I had the financial ledgers from Jonathan, and now I had the vocal confession of the co-conspirators. But before I could even send the audio file to Jonathan's encrypted server, my phone buzzed violently in my hand. It was a high-priority alert from the private investigator Jonathan had deployed to shadow Bradley. I opened the encrypted message expecting an update on the stolen funds. The text was short, but it escalated the war to a terrifying, highly illegal new level. Garrett, look at the attached surveillance photos immediately. Bradley is not just stealing from the pension fund to buy houses. He is actively meeting with the vice president of finance from our biggest market competitor. He is handing over classified Apex development blueprints. He is committing federal corporate espionage. The screen of my phone illuminated the rough wood of my porch with a harsh, glaring light. I stared at the high-resolution surveillance photographs sent by Jonathan's private investigator. Bradley was sitting in a secluded, dimly lit booth at an exclusive downtown hotel lounge. He was not alone. Across from him sat a stunning woman with sharp, calculating features and a tailored crimson suit. I recognized her instantly. Her name was Victoria Vance. She was the vice president of finance for Horizon Logistics, which was Apex Holdings' most aggressive and ruthless global competitor. Between them on the polished oak table rested a thick sealed manila folder bearing the highly classified Apex corporate seal. Bradley's hand rested casually over Victoria's hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. He was not just conducting illegal backroom negotiations. He was intimately involved with the very woman buying his treason. My son-in-law was engaged in a full-blown affair, and the currency of their romance was my company's classified intellectual property. The severity of the entire situation instantly shifted. We were no longer dealing with a greedy, arrogant husband embezzling retirement funds to buy a beach house for his pretentious parents. We were staring directly down the barrel of federal corporate espionage. Bradley had just crossed the line from a domestic liability into a national security threat. I walked back inside the cabin, my boots heavy against the floorboards, and immediately opened my encrypted laptop to establish a secure link with Jonathan. The private investigator had managed to plant a highly sensitive directional microphone near their table before they arrived. The audio file downloaded to my secure server in seconds. I hit play. Bradley's slick, overconfident voice filled my quiet living room. He sounded absolutely invincible. The complete schematic for the automated distribution algorithm is in that folder, Victoria, Bradley boasted smoothly. My engineers spent 4 grueling years developing it. It cuts global supply chain delays by 40% and reduces overhead by half. Apex is planning to roll it out globally next quarter. If Horizon Logistics implements this architecture first, you will completely obliterate our market share by December. Victoria let out a low, seductive laugh that made my stomach churn. You are handing me the keys to the kingdom, Bradley. My board of directors will authorize the $10 million consulting fee to your offshore account by midnight. But what about your illustrious anonymous founder? Will he not notice his crown jewel missing from the vault? Bradley scoffed, a sound dripping with pure, unadulterated contempt. The founder is a ghost. He is probably some senile old billionaire sitting on a yacht entirely disconnected from the daily operations. I run Apex now. I control the narrative. By the time anyone realizes the algorithm has been duplicated, I will have already forced a merger and cashed out my golden parachute, and I will finally be free of my pathetic, clinging wife and her miserable, dirt-poor father. I listened to the sharp clinking of their champagne glasses. The audio continued with the sickening sounds of their whispered, illicit promises. They were actively planning a future built on the absolute destruction of my company and the breaking of my daughter's heart. Bradley was selling out 30 years of my sweat and blood for a $10 million payout and a night in a hotel room with a corporate spy. I did not throw the laptop against the wall. I did not scream into the empty cabin or break the furniture. I sat perfectly still, breathing in slow, measured counts. The sheer magnitude of his stupidity was breathtaking. Bradley actually believed he was a master tactician orchestrating the crime of the century. He thought he could casually dismantle a billion-dollar empire, betray his wife, and walk away rich and unscathed. He failed to comprehend that a man who builds a titan of industry from a single rusty truck does not leave the vault unlocked. I felt a profound, icy calm wash over me. The last remaining shred of mercy I held for the man Camille loved evaporated instantly. He had weaponized my daughter's affection to gain access to my life's work, and now he was selling it to my greatest enemy. He had forced my hand. I was no longer merely defending my family against a greedy social climber. I was a corporate executioner preparing the gallows for a traitor. I opened a direct command terminal to my private banker in Geneva. I began silently mapping the digital traps that would soon sever every financial artery Bradley thought he controlled. I was going to let him taste the $10 million. I was going to let him feel the intoxicating rush of absolute victory before I brought the entire sky crashing down on his head. He wanted to play high-stakes corporate warfare with a ghost. I was going to show him exactly why ghosts are terrifying. The automated distribution algorithm Bradley just handed over to Victoria Vance was not just another software update. It was the absolute crown jewel of Apex Holdings. 10 years ago, I personally handpicked a team of brilliant young engineers from top universities. I poured hundreds of millions of my own private capital into a black project hidden deep within our research and development division. We created a predictive logistical network that revolutionized global shipping routes by using artificial intelligence to predict weather patterns and supply chain disruptions. It was designed to secure the jobs of thousands of Apex employees for the next 2 decades, ensuring they could feed their families no matter how the global economy shifted. It was my ultimate parting gift to the industry before I planned to step back entirely and let Camille inherit a flawless, self-sustaining machine. Bradley was stealing a legacy he could not even begin to comprehend. He saw a quick $10 million to fund his fake aristocratic lifestyle. I saw the compromised livelihoods of thousands of loyal families who trusted me to lead them. He was treating my company like a cheap pawn shop, pawning off priceless innovations to fund his fragile ego and impress his secret mistress. A bright green light suddenly pulsed on the corner of my monitor. It was an automated alert from the Apex corporate boardroom system. Bradley had just initiated an emergency high-priority virtual meeting with the executive board of directors. I quickly activated my anonymous founder override access, tapping directly into the secure video and audio feed without leaving a digital trace. The camera angle showed the sleek glass-walled boardroom at the Apex headquarters. Bradley sat at the head of the long mahogany table, exuding total control, completely unaware that the man he had just called a dirt-poor father was watching his every single move from a wooden cabin. He steepled his fingers and looked directly into the camera lens, addressing the remote board members. "Gentlemen," Bradley announced, his voice projecting artificial authority, "we have a critical issue regarding the anonymous founder's voting shares. He has been completely absent for far too long, and his silence is a liability to our growth. I have drafted a proposal to issue a massive new block of executive stock that will permanently dilute his control. We are going to vote to transfer absolute power directly to me." I leaned forward in my chair, my eyes locking onto his smug face through the screen. The final battle lines were drawn, and Bradley had just authorized his own professional execution. I watched the digital feed stream flawlessly across my secure monitor. Bradley leaned over the polished mahogany table of the Apex headquarters boardroom, his custom suit catching the high-end lighting. He looked directly into the camera lens, projecting an aura of absolute dominance to the remote board members. "Gentlemen," Bradley began, his voice dripping with rehearsed charisma, "Apex Holdings is standing on the edge of a global revolution. But we are anchored to a ghost." I did not blink. I turned the volume up. The silence of my wooden cabin absorbed his treacherous words. He was officially launching his coup. Bradley pressed a button on his remote control, bringing up a sleek presentation on the boardroom's secondary screens. The anonymous founder currently controls 51% of the voting shares. For a decade, this invisible entity has stunted our aggressive acquisition strategies. You all know that Horizon Logistics is breathing down our necks. We need agility. We need absolute, unhindered executive authority. He paused for dramatic effect, sweeping his gaze across the virtual attendees. I am proposing the immediate issuance of 10 million new Class A executive shares. This strategic dilution will permanently reduce the founder's holding to a minority stake. It transfers operational sovereignty directly to me. The audacity of his greed was breathtaking. He wanted to steal the kingdom by legally erasing the king. He was pitching a hostile takeover disguised as a corporate growth initiative. A voice crackled over the boardroom speakers. It was Richard Sterling, the oldest and most rigid member of the board. I had personally vetted Richard 15 years ago. "Bradley, your ambition is noted, but your legal comprehension is severely lacking," Richard stated dryly. "The corporate charter is completely ironclad. You cannot dilute the founder's majority shares by a simple board vote. The bylaws explicitly require the founder's physical signature on a transfer mandate. Without that ink, your proposal is a total fantasy." Bradley smiled. It was the sickening, predatory grin of a man who thought he held the ultimate trump card. "I am well aware of the bylaws, Richard, and I am telling you the era of the ghost is over. I have successfully traced the founder's operational proxy. I have identified the weak link." Bradley leaned closer to the microphone, his eyes dark with malicious intent. "I have a guaranteed, legally binding method to force the founder to surrender his controlling stake. I will deliver the signed dilution mandate this Saturday night live at the 30th anniversary gala." The board erupted into a chaotic chorus of murmurs and demanding questions. I muted the audio feed. The quiet of the cabin rushed back in, but my mind was roaring like a freight train. I stared at Bradley's frozen, arrogant face on the screen. He was promising the board a signed surrender. He was promising them my head on a silver platter. I leaned back in my chair and analyzed his angle with surgical precision. How did a mid-level executive masquerading as a CEO plan to force the anonymous founder of a billion-dollar empire to sign away his life's work? The answer hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Bradley did not know Garrett Cole was the founder. He thought I was just a broke, uneducated old man. But he knew Garrett Cole was Camille's father. He knew I had a private trust fund set up for her. Thomas and Patricia had just visited my cabin hours ago, threatening me with an assisted living facility. They had threatened to have me declared legally incompetent. Bradley was not looking for the founder in boardrooms or offshore banks. He was looking to consolidate absolute power by attacking on all fronts. He planned to sell my company's secrets to Horizon Logistics for $10 million. He planned to usurp the board of directors by forcing a stock dilution. And to fund his immediate debts, he was coming for my personal assets through a medical proxy. He assumed that if he gained legal guardianship over me, he would gain access to Camille's trust fund and whatever modest properties I held. He planned to weaponize my fabricated dementia to steal my family's security while simultaneously staging a corporate coup. The sheer diabolical cruelty of his strategy was astonishing. He was willing to strip an old man of his basic human rights just to satisfy his corporate bloodlust. He wanted to lock me in a psychiatric ward so I could not interfere with his grand debut at the gala. I opened a secure drawer in my desk and pulled out a thick leather-bound folder containing the original Apex corporate charter. 30 years ago, when the company first expanded beyond a regional logistics fleet, a syndicate of ruthless venture capitalists tried to execute a hostile takeover. They tried to bury me in legal paperwork, manipulate the board, and dilute my shares. I crushed them. I fired the entire executive suite and rewrote the company bylaws myself. I embedded a lethal poison pill deep within the corporate DNA. The charter strictly dictates that no dilution of majority shares can occur without a biometric verification and a physical signature from the founder executed under absolute free will. Bradley thought he could bypass the corporate defenses with slick speeches. He thought a piece of medical paper signed under duress or deception would grant him ultimate authority. He fundamentally misunderstood the architecture of the fortress he was trying to invade. He was a common thief trying to pick a biometric bank vault lock with a plastic toothpick. He believed his Ivy League degree made him the smartest man in the room. He had no idea he was playing chess against the man who invented the board. The boardroom feed on my monitor flickered and died. Bradley had ended the meeting. He had planted his flag and promised the elite directors a revolution by Saturday night. I closed the secure terminal and stared out the window into the pitch-black forest surrounding my cabin. The wind howled through the pine trees, signaling a coming storm. My phone vibrated intensely on the heavy oak desk. It was a text message from Camille. The words on the screen made my blood run absolute cold. "Dad Bradley is insisting we come to the cabin tomorrow morning. He says he is bringing a private specialist to check on your health. He is talking about legal guardianship and your declining mental state. I am so scared. Please let me help you." I did not reply immediately. I set the phone down facing the ceiling. The trap was officially springing shut. Bradley was bringing his bought and paid for doctor directly to my front door. He was coming to strip me of my rights, steal my daughter's trust fund, and clear the path for his corporate takeover in one sweeping motion. He wanted to play the role of the deeply concerned son-in-law while holding a legal knife to my throat. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of ice water. I drank it slowly, letting the freezing liquid ground my thoughts. Bradley was marching straight into the kill zone. I was ready for him. The morning sun barely crested the tall pines when a sleek black sedan crawled up my gravel driveway. I sat in my rocking chair on the porch with a frayed wool blanket draped over my knees. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, staring vacantly at the distant tree line. The heavy car doors opened with an expensive muffled thud. Bradley stepped out first. He wore a navy cashmere trench coat and a smile that looked exactly like a razor blade. Camille emerged from the passenger side next. Her face was pale, her posture defeated, and her eyes were red from a severe lack of sleep. From the back seat stepped a third man carrying a vintage leather medical bag. He wore a tailored charcoal suit under a pristine white lab coat. He looked more like a paid television actor than a legitimate medical professional. The wolves had officially arrived at my front door. "Good morning," Garrett Bradley announced loudly. He used the exaggerated, agonizingly slow tone one might use to speak to a deaf toddler. "I brought someone very special to see you today. This is Dr. Aris. He is a premier cognitive specialist from the city. We are all very worried about your little memory lapses. We just want to make sure you are safe." Dr. Aris stepped forward and offered a perfectly manicured hand. He did not look at my face. His eyes swept over my worn boots and my faded flannel shirt with poorly concealed disdain. "Hello, Mr. Cole. Bradley has told me so much about your recent struggles. The wandering at night, the sudden confusion, the unprovoked aggression. We are going to do a very quick, painless evaluation to get you the help you desperately need." I let my bottom lip tremble. I looked past the two men directly at Camille with wide, frightened eyes. "I am fine, sweetheart. I do not need a doctor. My mind is perfectly clear. I just had a clumsy night at your house, that is all." Camille took a hesitant step toward me, her voice breaking. "Dad Bradley says it is just a routine check, just to be safe. He says if we do not do this, the state might intervene." Bradley immediately put a heavy, controlling hand on her shoulder, physically holding her back from comforting me. "It is for his own good, Camille. Let the doctor do his job. Stand back and let the professionals handle this situation." Dr. Aris pulled a silver pen and a thick clipboard from his leather bag. He began a rapid-fire sequence of cognitive tests designed specifically to humiliate and confuse. He asked me what day of the week it was. I intentionally hesitated, looking up at the sky in fake bewilderment, and gave him the wrong month entirely. He asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. I stumbled heavily on the third number and pretended to lose my train of thought. He asked me to identify basic objects around the porch. I called a flower pot a coffee mug. I played the role of a terrified, rapidly deteriorating old man with absolute flawless perfection. Dr. Aris nodded sympathetically, but his eyes were entirely devoid of genuine medical compassion. He was a hired gun executing a paid hit. He scribbled some quick notes on his clipboard and turned to Bradley with a solemn expression. "The cognitive decline is severe and accelerating much faster than anticipated. His executive functioning is heavily compromised. He requires immediate supervised intervention and a legally designated proxy to handle his daily affairs before he harms himself or someone else." Bradley sighed deeply, projecting a masterful display of fake sorrow. He rubbed his temples as if carrying the weight of the world. "It breaks my heart to see him fall apart like this. But we must be responsible adults. We must protect him." Bradley reached into the inside pocket of his cashmere coat. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents securely clipped together. He placed them on the small wooden table next to my rocking chair. "Garrett, this is just a standard health proxy. It simply allows Camille and me to make medical decisions for you in case of a severe emergency. It is just a safety net to ensure you get the best care possible. All you have to do is sign the bottom line." I stared down at the crisp white documents. My physical posture remained slumped and weak, but my mind was operating with lethal, predatory clarity. I scanned the dense legal paragraphs hidden meticulously beneath the standard medical jargon. Bradley was not asking for a simple health proxy. He had buried an ironclad, durable power of attorney clause deep within the second page. The contract explicitly granted him absolute unilateral control over all of my personal assets, bank accounts, real estate, and any associated trust funds in my name. It was a blank check. He was using a bribed doctor to steal Camille's safety net and liquidate my modest life savings to cover his massive corporate theft and fund his illicit affair. If I refused to sign the paper right now, Bradley would use Dr. Aris's fabricated medical evaluation to drag me into family court. He would freeze my assets legally during a protracted, highly publicized legal battle and make my life a living hell. If I threw the papers in his arrogant face and revealed my true identity as the founder of Apex Holdings today, I would blow the element of absolute surprise I needed for the upcoming anniversary gala. I needed Bradley to feel entirely invincible. I needed him to walk into that extravagant ballroom believing he held the entire world in his greedy hands. I had to sign the paper. But I was going to sign it on my own precise terms. 30 years ago, when I officially incorporated Apex Holdings and registered my anonymous founder status, my high-level corporate attorneys forced me to create a highly stylized biometric legal signature. That specific signature is registered globally with the Federal Banking Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Apex Corporate Charter. It is a complex sequence of sharp angles and connected loops that I only use for multi-million-dollar corporate mandates and legal directives. The signature I use for signing for grocery deliveries or casual mail is entirely different. It is a messy, illegible scribble that holds absolutely zero legal weight in any court of law or financial institution. Bradley was a pathetic amateur playing a billionaire's game. He did not know that a legal signature is only powerful if it matches the master corporate ledger. I looked up at Bradley with tears welling in my eyes. I reached out with a violently shaking hand and took the silver pen from the table. "Are you sure this will help me, Bradley? I do not want to be a burden to my little girl. I just want to stay in my cabin." "I promise you, Garrett." Bradley purred softly, his eyes fixed greedily on the signature line. "This will solve all of our problems. You will be completely taken care of. Just sign right there and everything will be fine." I pressed the silver pen to the thick paper. I let my hand jerk and slide uncontrollably. I scrawled a jagged, looping mess across the dotted line. It was a completely meaningless sequence of ink that vaguely resembled my first name. I handed the clipboard back to him with a trembling gasp. Bradley snatched the clipboard out of my hands with lightning speed. He did not even verify the signature. He just saw the wet ink on the legal line and smiled. It was the terrifying, victorious smile of a predator who had just swallowed his prey whole. He quickly shoved the documents back into the inner pocket of his coat. "We are done here," Bradley announced sharply, his compassionate facade dropping instantly. He turned to Camille and grabbed her arm with bruising force. "The doctor will arrange the transport to the private facility for next week. Say goodbye to your father, Camille. We have a corporate luncheon to attend." Camille looked back at me, fresh tears streaming down her exhausted face. She tried to pull away from his grip, but he held her tight. "I am so sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I will come back and see you tomorrow. I promise." I gave her a nearly imperceptible nod, a silent, steady promise that everything was under absolute control. Bradley pulled her toward the car, treating her like a piece of luggage rather than a wife. Dr. Aris followed them without a backward glance. The black sedan sped down the gravel driveway, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. I sat alone in my rocking chair and watched them disappear into the dense forest. Bradley thought he had just stolen my entire life. He thought he possessed the key to Camille's trust fund and the authority to lock me away in a padded room. He had absolutely no idea he was holding a worthless piece of paper that would soon become Exhibit A in his federal fraud trial. The moment the sound of their engine faded, I sat up straight. The tremors vanished from my hands. I pulled my secure, encrypted phone from my jacket pocket and dialed Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan answered on the first ring. "Tell me he took the bait. He swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker." I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "He has the fake medical proxy. He thinks he has full, durable power of attorney over my estate and Camille's trust fund. He is going to try to drain her accounts the second he gets back to his office." Jonathan let out a sharp, predatory laugh over the encrypted connection. "That is going to be a spectacular failure. What is your next move, Garrett?" "It is time to systematically dismantle his safety nets," I commanded. "Contact the bank. Flag every single joint account tied to Bradley Sutton. When Camille tries to use her personal cards for her hospital expenses today, I want them fully declined. I want Bradley to lock her out of her own money." Jonathan paused, his tone shifting to mild concern. "Garrett freezing Camille's access is going to terrify her. She is already under immense psychological stress. It is necessary, Jonathan. She needs to feel the absolute extreme of his financial abuse. She needs to realize that he is isolating her. When her cards decline, she will finally hit her breaking point. She will come back to me tonight seeking answers, and that is when I will lay all the cards on the table. Prepare the offshore freeze orders for Bradley's shadow accounts. Let us see how a CEO operates when he cannot even afford to buy a cup of coffee." The fluorescent lights of the pediatric ward buzzed with a sterile, exhausting hum. Camille stood at the hospital pharmacy counter, her blue scrubs wrinkled after a brutal 14-hour shift. In front of her stood a young mother, eyes red from crying, holding a sick infant wrapped in a thin blanket. The insurance company had outright refused to cover a specialized asthma medication, and the out-of-pocket cost was $400. Camille did what she had done dozens of times before. She pulled her premium platinum credit card from her wallet and handed it to the pharmacist. "Put the medication on my personal tab," she said with a tired but genuine smile. The pharmacist ran the card through the electronic terminal. A harsh beep echoed in the quiet hallway. Declined. He frowned, wiped the magnetic strip, and ran it again. The same obnoxious beep rang out. "I am sorry, Dr. Cole. The banking system is rejecting the transaction entirely." Camille felt a flush of confusion heat her cheeks. "That is completely impossible," she murmured, reaching into her bag. "Let me use my other card." She pulled out a debit card linked directly to her primary checking account. The pharmacist swiped it. Declined. A bold red message flashed across the digital display telling the merchant to confiscate the card. The young mother looked down humiliated while Camille frantically tapped the banking application on her phone. "Access denied. Contact primary account holder." Her blood turned to ice. She had over $30,000 in that account just yesterday. Now she was locked out of her own financial life. Camille stepped away from the counter and hurried into an empty staff break room. She dialed the customer service number on the back of her card. The automated voice eventually transferred her to a live representative. "Ma'am," the representative stated in a flat clinical tone, "the primary account holder, Bradley Sutton, initiated a total security freeze on all secondary cards attached to the joint accounts this afternoon. He also authorized a complete transfer of your liquid assets into a newly established private corporate trust." Camille gripped the phone so tightly, her knuckles turned bright white. "He drained the accounts," she asked, her voice trembling with sheer disbelief. "I am sorry, ma'am, but you no longer have authorized access to view those financial details," the representative replied before disconnecting. Camille immediately dialed Bradley's personal cell phone. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding entirely too relaxed for a man who had just stolen his wife's money. "Bradley, why are all my cards declining at the hospital?" Camille demanded, abandoning any attempt at a polite greeting. "I am standing here unable to pay for a patient's medication." Bradley let out a slow, deeply patronizing sigh. "Camille, please calm down. You are being overly emotional again. I told you last night that we needed to consolidate our liquidity. I moved the funds to secure our investments and to prepare for the massive legal and medical fees we are going to face with your father's upcoming commitment process. You are spending thousands of dollars on random charity cases when we need to focus on protecting our own family. You froze my personal checking account, Bradley. That is the money I earn from working endless shifts at this hospital. It is my money. You have absolutely no right to touch it." His voice dropped, losing its manufactured warmth and revealing the cold steel beneath. "We are married, Camille. It is our money. And since you clearly cannot make rational financial decisions regarding your father or your bleeding heart patients, I am taking the wheel. I am the CEO of a major corporation. I handle the finances from now on. Go home and get some sleep. You are acting crazy." He hung up. The line went dead. Camille stared at her phone. She was a highly educated, successful doctor, and her husband had just effectively reduced her to a penniless hostage with a single phone call. The sheer panic Bradley intended to inflict did not break her. It ignited a profound, blazing clarity. The polished illusion of her perfect marriage completely shattered in that sterile hospital break room. Bradley was not protecting their financial future. He was isolating her, controlling her, and punishing her for defending her father the night before. He was systematically cutting off every resource she had to force her into submission. She walked back to the pharmacy, handed the pharmacist her grandmother's vintage gold watch as collateral, and promised to return the next day with cash to cover the infant's medicine. Then she walked out into the freezing night, climbed into her car, and drove straight past her upscale suburban neighborhood. She merged onto the highway, heading directly for the dense pine forest. She did not drive to find comfort from a confused, deteriorating old man. She drove because the cabin was the only place left in the world that belonged entirely to her bloodline. When she pulled into the gravel driveway, the cabin was dark, save for a single warm light glowing from the kitchen window. She marched up the wooden steps and pushed the front door open, tears of absolute rage streaming down her face. She expected to find her father sitting in his rocking chair mumbling about the past. Instead, she found me standing perfectly straight at the kitchen counter. I was pouring 2 cups of hot black coffee. I did not look confused. I did not look fragile. I looked exactly like a man expecting a war. "Sit down, Camille," I said, my voice carrying a booming, commanding authority she had not heard since she was a teenager. "We have a massive amount of work to do." Camille froze in the doorway. She stared at my steady hands, my straight posture, and the complete absence of the terrified old man from this morning. "Dad, what is going on? You sound completely different." I pointed to the heavy oak dining table. Spread across the surface were dozens of classified corporate documents, high-resolution surveillance photographs, and complex financial ledgers. I took a seat across from her and pushed a cup of coffee forward. "I am not losing my mind, Camille. I never was. I played the fool today because Bradley brought a bribed doctor to steal your trust fund and lock me in an asylum. I gave him a fake signature on a worthless piece of paper to buy us time." Camille slowly sat down, her eyes scanning the highly classified documents. The Apex corporate seal was stamped on everything in sight. How do you have these?" she whispered. "How did you get restricted executive files?" I looked her dead in the eye. "I did not steal them, sweetheart. I own them. I own the skyscraper they are printed in. I own the mahogany desks the executives sit at. I am the anonymous founder and majority shareholder of Apex Holdings. I built the empire Bradley is currently trying to destroy." Her jaw dropped. The silence in the cabin was absolute. I explained everything. I told her how I wanted her to grow up valuing hard work instead of relying on a billionaire's safety net. I told her how I manipulated the board of directors to make Bradley the CEO solely to secure her happiness and future. I gave him the crown, I said, my voice as cold as the winter wind outside, and he used it to betray you. I pushed a specific red folder toward her. "This is the financial forensic audit of the company pension fund. Bradley has actively embezzled over $2 million. He used $500,000 just last week to buy his parents a beachfront mansion in the Hamptons. He froze your accounts today because I covertly blocked his access to your $50 million trust fund last night." Camille's hands shook as she flipped through the dense financial ledgers. The numbers were undeniable, but the betrayal cut even deeper. I slid a series of glossy photographs across the table. They showed Bradley and Victoria Vance, the Horizon Logistics executive, sharing an intimate kiss on a hotel balcony. "This was taken yesterday afternoon by my private investigator," I stated bluntly. "He is having a full-blown affair with our biggest corporate competitor. He is actively selling classified Apex trade secrets to her for a $10 million payout. He plans to bankrupt my company, drain your accounts, and leave you with nothing." Camille stared at the image of her husband kissing another woman. A single tear fell onto the glossy paper, but she did not sob. The initial shock mutated into a terrifying familiar anger. It was the exact same cold, calculated fury that ran through my veins. She wiped her face and looked up at me, her eyes burning with a lethal intensity. "He thought he could break me by taking my credit cards," she whispered, her voice dropping to a dangerous, steady rhythm. "He thought I was just a weak, dependent wife who would beg for her allowance." She pushed the photos aside and leaned forward, resting her arms firmly on the table. She was no longer a victim. She was a coal. "What is the tactical plan, Dad? How do we absolutely destroy him?" I smiled a genuine predatory smile. "We are going to let him throw his massive 30th anniversary gala this Saturday. We are going to let him stand on that stage in front of the entire financial world. And then we are going to drop the sky right on top of his head. Get some sleep, Camille. Tomorrow, we start hunting." The digital clock on my secure monitor flipped to 3 in the morning. Camille sat beside me at the heavy oak dining table. Her eyes were fixed on the glowing screen. She was running on adrenaline and bitter resolve. I established a secure video link with Jonathan Pierce. My chief counsel appeared on the screen perfectly groomed despite the brutal hour. He sat in his high-rise office overlooking the city skyline. His fingers were poised over his encrypted terminal. "Are we ready to drop the guillotine, Jonathan?" I asked. My voice was a low, steady rumble in the quiet cabin. "The federal warrants are sealed, and the asset freeze protocols are fully primed," Jonathan replied with a predatory grin. "I have the Securities and Exchange Commission holding the wire fraud indictments in a classified vault. They are eager to raid his office. But per your strict instructions, no federal agents will make a move until Saturday night. We are going to let him step onto that stage first. Now give me the verbal authorization to sever his financial arteries." Execute the freeze I commanded. Jonathan tapped a single key on his keyboard. The sound echoed through the speakers with absolute finality. Within 3 seconds, a cascade of green confirmation notifications flooded my surveillance dashboard. The offshore shadow accounts Bradley Sutton established in Geneva and the Cayman Islands were instantly seized by a coalition of international banking authorities and federal investigators. The $2.4 million he embezzled from the Apex employee pension tier was securely locked in an untouchable government evidence trust. The $10 million bribe he received from Victoria Vance for selling our corporate algorithm met the exact same fate. But here is the true masterpiece of Jonathan's legal warfare. Bradley had absolutely no idea he was ruined. Jonathan intentionally left the front-end user interface of Bradley's banking applications completely intact. When my arrogant son-in-law logged into his mobile banking app, he still saw $12 million sitting comfortably in his checking accounts. He saw a massive, glorious fortune. He saw the ultimate validation of his fake corporate genius. But it was nothing more than a digital mirage. It was phantom money. The actual capital was gone. Every time he swiped his elite black card moving forward, the transaction would secretly route through a temporary credit extension I personally underwrote with my private bank. I was extending him a massive line of false credit solely to let him rack up federal wire fraud charges with every single purchase. "I want to watch him spend," Camille stated. Her voice was devoid of any sorrow. It was sharp and analytical. "You will," I replied. I brought up a secondary window on the monitor. It displayed a live feed of Bradley's credit card activity. We sat together in the quiet cabin and watched the digital trap capture its prey. At exactly 8 in the morning, the first transaction appeared on the screen. Bradley was awake and he was celebrating his perceived victory. The ledger showed a massive charge at an exclusive European sports car dealership downtown. He just swiped his card for an $80,000 down payment on a custom imported vehicle. He was securing his new toy for the new life he planned to live after destroying mine. Camille watched the $80,000 charge clear the phantom account. "He always wanted an Aston Martin," she noted coolly. "He told me last year we could not afford one because my medical school loans were holding us back. He made me feel guilty for wanting to pay off my own education. Now he is buying luxury cars with stolen pension funds." 20 minutes later, a second transaction popped up on the live feed. It was a charge for $55,000 at a high-end boutique jeweler. My jaw tightened. I glanced at Camille. She did not flinch. She simply stared at the screen and did the math. "Our anniversary is not for another 6 months," she said, her tone as hard as diamonds. "My birthday passed in April. That purchase is not for me. He is buying a $55,000 piece of jewelry for Victoria Vance to celebrate their corporate treason." I watched my daughter closely. A weak woman would have broken down in tears seeing her husband buy a fortune in diamonds for his mistress. Camille just picked up her coffee mug and took a slow sip. The last lingering shred of her marriage died in that exact moment. She was fully detached. She was finally operating like a true Cole. 30 years ago, I built this exact digital failsafe into the corporate architecture of Apex Holdings. My very first chief financial officer tried to skim a small fraction of a percent from the weekly payroll. He thought he was a genius who could outsmart a blue-collar truck driver. I caught him because I never trust a single set of books. I designed a mirrored accounting system. The main system shows the executives exactly what they expect to see. It feeds their egos and keeps them complacent. The mirrored system buried beneath layers of biometric encryption shows the absolute unvarnished truth. Bradley thought he was a ghost moving untraceable funds across international borders. He failed to realize he was walking through a house made entirely of glass mirrors. I saw every single reflection. By Thursday afternoon, Bradley's phantom spending spree reached astronomical levels. He was high on the adrenaline of his successful espionage and his impending corporate coup. He felt completely untouchable. He believed he held my signed medical proxy in his coat pocket. He believed he had successfully locked Camille out of her own finances to force her submission. He believed the $10 million bribe from Horizon Logistics made him a king. My secure phone buzzed. Jonathan's name flashed on the screen. Garrett, Jonathan said, sounding thoroughly amused. "Our boy is putting on quite a show. He just contacted the event coordinators at the Waldorf Astoria. He upgraded the catering and the floral arrangements for the anniversary gala to the most expensive tier available. He wants white truffles, vintage champagne, and imported orchids on every single table. He just wired a non-refundable deposit of $150,000 to the hotel using the frozen offshore account. I smiled a cold, terrifying smile. Let the transaction process through the phantom credit extension. Let him build the most extravagant stage possible. When the final invoice hits on Saturday night, the hotel management will realize the account is completely empty. We are going to let his fake empire collapse under the weight of his own vanity. At 6 o'clock that evening, Camille's phone rang. It was Bradley. We had anticipated this call. Camille took a deep breath, instantly smoothing her features into a mask of submissive exhaustion. She answered the phone and put it on speaker so I could hear the monster speak. Camille, sweetheart, Bradley cooed. His voice was thick with manufactured warmth and sickening condescension. I know things got a little heated last night. I know you were upset about the accounts. But you have to understand, I am carrying the weight of a billion-dollar empire on my shoulders. I have to make the hard decisions to protect our future. I understand, Bradley. Camille replied softly, her acting skills absolutely flawless. I was just panicked about my patients. Do not worry your pretty head about the patients, he dismissed casually. We have bigger things to focus on. The gala is in 48 hours. I had my assistant send a package to the house. It is a designer dress. I need you to wear it on Saturday. You need to stand by my side and look like the perfect supportive wife when I make my keynote address to the board of directors. It is going to be the most important speech of my life. And what about my father? Camille asked, letting her voice tremble perfectly. Bradley let out a long, heavy sigh. I spoke with Dr. Aris this morning. We are finalizing the medical transfer documents. Your father will be safely relocated to a premium care facility by Sunday morning. He will get the psychiatric help he needs, and we can finally breathe easy. Just focus on looking beautiful for the cameras on Saturday. I will handle the rest. I love you, Camille. I love you too, Bradley, she whispered. She ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. The silence stretched between us for a long moment. He bought me a dress to wear while he destroys my family, she stated quietly. He wants me to be his beautiful little prop. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. You will wear the dress, Camille. You will stand by his side. You will smile for the cameras. And when he reaches the absolute peak of his miserable, arrogant life, you will be the one to push him off the cliff. We spent the rest of Thursday night finalizing the strike package. Jonathan compiled the printed dossiers containing the wire fraud evidence, the corporate espionage files, and the high-resolution photographs of Bradley kissing Victoria Vance. We prepared enough copies for every single member of the board of directors and every major investor attending the gala. Bradley Sutton thought he was throwing a coronation. He had no idea he had just financed his own public execution. The trap was set. The phantom money was spent. The only thing left to do was put on a suit and attend the party. Saturday arrived with the biting chill of an approaching winter storm. The sky over the lake was a bruising, heavy gray reflecting the cold reality of what was about to unfold. I sat on my front porch calmly polishing my black dress shoes with a soft cloth. The quiet of the morning was shattered when two unmarked black SUVs rolled aggressively up my gravel driveway. They did not park politely. They positioned their massive armored vehicles across the path, completely blocking my old Ford truck from leaving the property. 4 men stepped out into the freezing air. They were built like brick walls, wearing cheap black suits that stretched tightly across their broad, heavily muscled shoulders. They had the unmistakable aggressive posture of hired muscle. Bradley had not just sent a warning message, he had sent a physical cage. He was taking absolutely no chances on the day of the 30th anniversary gala. He wanted to ensure the crazy old man stayed securely locked in the woods while he stole my company in the city. The lead bodyguard, a man with a thick neck and a flattened, broken nose, marched directly up my wooden steps. He did not bother with a respectful greeting. He simply crossed his massive arms and planted his heavy boots firmly on my porch, casting a large shadow over my rocking chair. Garrett Cole. The man grunted, his voice rough and dripping with dismissive authority. You are going back inside the cabin right now. You are going to sit down and you are going to stay there until we tell you otherwise. I kept my hands perfectly steady, slowly running the polishing cloth over the premium leather of my shoe. I did not look up immediately. And who exactly gave you the authority to trespass on my private property and dictate my daily schedule? The thug laughed a short, ugly sound that echoed across the quiet lake. "Your son-in-law, Bradley Sutton, gave us the authority. He holds your legal medical proxy. He determined that you are currently suffering a severe cognitive episode and represent a massive physical danger to yourself. He hired our firm to provide immediate round-the-clock supervision. We are your new caretakers, old man. If you try to start that truck or walk down that road, we will physically restrain you for your own medical safety." Bradley made it exceptionally clear that you are not to leave this property under any circumstances today. If you resist, we are authorized to use sedatives. They were actually going to hold me hostage under the legal disguise of a health intervention. Bradley had weaponized the fake signature I gave him on Thursday morning. He thought he had completely outsmarted me by using private security to enforce a fraudulent legal document. He assumed a 70-year-old man in a flannel shirt would simply cower in fear against 4 muscular street thugs. I looked up at the lead guard. I let my hands tremble slightly, deliberately dropping the polishing cloth onto the floorboards. "But I have to go to town," I whispered, pitching my voice to sound frail and utterly terrified. "I need to pick up my blood pressure medication. Please, I will not cause any trouble. I just need to go to the pharmacy." "Get inside the house," the thug barked, stepping aggressively toward me and raising a heavy hand. "Do not make us drag you in there by your collar. You are not going anywhere today." I did not move a muscle. I simply stared at his heavy, clumsy boots. Bradley's arrogance was truly a bottomless pit of ignorance. He believed he could command the world using a tiny fraction of the power I had handed him. He thought hiring low-level street enforcers was enough to quarantine the architect of a billion-dollar empire. He was treating this like a petty domestic dispute, a minor annoyance to be swatted away before his big night. He completely failed to realize he was dealing with a corporate warlord who had spent decades destroying ruthless adversaries. I did not feel a single ounce of fear. I felt a profound, chilling sense of anticipation. I reached slowly into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out my encrypted phone. The lead thug immediately lunged forward to snatch the device from my hands, assuming I was trying to dial the local police dispatch. I did not dial the police. I pressed a single pre-programmed red button on the secure touchscreen. "Stand down," I said. My voice instantly shifted from the trembling whisper of a frightened old man to the booming absolute authority of a commanding general. The thug froze, his thick hand hovering mere inches from my face, momentarily confused by the sudden lethal drop in my tone. He did not understand the shift in the atmosphere. Exactly 20 years ago, Apex Holdings expanded our logistics network into highly volatile international territories. Our global supply chains were constantly threatened by organized syndicates, corrupt officials, and armed hijackers. I did not hire local police or cheap security guards to protect my billions in moving assets. I recruited Roman. Roman was a former top-tier military special operations commander who had been unjustly discharged and left with absolutely nothing. I found him working security at a shipping yard. I paid off his overwhelming medical debts, secured a safe house for his family, and made him the global head of Apex Security. I gave him a blank check to build the most elite, highly trained, tactical corporate security force on the entire planet. Roman is fiercely, violently loyal. He does not answer to the board of directors. He does not answer to the chief executive officer. Roman answers exclusively to the anonymous founder of the company. And I had summoned him and his premier tactical unit to the perimeter of my cabin property at exactly 4 o'clock this morning. They had been waiting in the dense pine forest for 5 hours, completely invisible, watching these cheap thugs breathe. They were just waiting for my signal to strike. Before the lead bodyguard could process my shift in tone or react to the glowing red button on my phone, the forest line simply exploded into motion. 12 men dressed in unmarked tactical black gear poured out from behind the trees with terrifying synchronized speed. They moved in absolute silence. There was no shouting, no warnings, and no hesitation. Within exactly 3 seconds, Roman's team swarmed the porch and the gravel driveway. The lead thug was swept off his feet and pinned face down against the wooden floorboards before he could even shout a warning to his crew. A heavy knee pressed into his spine, knocking the wind out of his lungs. The other 3 men in the driveway were systematically disarmed, swept to the gravel, and bound with heavy-duty zip ties in the blink of an eye. The entire hostile takeover was completely neutralized before the thugs even knew they were under attack. Roman stepped casually onto my porch, his posture straight and heavily disciplined. He barely glanced at the restrained thug groaning in pain at his feet. "The perimeter is fully secure, sir. Roman stated, his voice calm and intensely professional. "What are your specific orders for the trespassers? Toss them in the back of their own vehicles and park them out of sight behind the equipment shed," I commanded, standing up slowly from my rocking chair. "Make sure you confiscate their communication devices. They can sit in the dark and freezing cold until tomorrow morning. They are not to interfere with tonight's schedule." "Consider it done, Mr. Cole," Roman replied smoothly. He gave a sharp hand signal to his team. The 4 terrified thugs were seamlessly dragged away like bags of trash, their protests muffled by the sheer efficiency of the tactical unit. I picked up my polished dress shoes from the floorboards and walked into the cabin. The time for wearing faded flannel and playing the victim was officially over. I walked into my bedroom and unzipped a heavy garment bag hanging carefully in the closet. I pulled out a custom-tailored midnight black Tom Ford suit that Jonathan had hand-delivered the night before. I dressed with meticulous precision. I fastened my platinum cufflinks and straightened my dark silk tie. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The blue-collar disguise was entirely gone. The fierce, untouchable founder had finally returned. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. I had a corporate gala to attend and a son-in-law to completely destroy. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was a masterclass in aggressive, unapologetic corporate opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a golden, shimmering light over hundreds of the most powerful financial titans in the country. Imported white orchids cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, filling the space with a heavy, intoxicating floral scent. A professional string quartet played a seamless classical arrangement in the corner, providing the perfect acoustic backdrop for the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos glided effortlessly across the polished marble floors, carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar, white truffles, and vintage French wine. At the exact center of this extravagant ecosystem stood Bradley Sutton. He wore a bespoke velvet dinner jacket tailored to absolute perfection, his chest puffed out like a conquering emperor returning from a victorious crusade. Camera flashes popped in rapid succession as industry photographers documented the 30th anniversary of Apex Holdings. Bradley soaked in the blinding lights with sheer, unadulterated greed. He truly believed he had orchestrated the perfect corporate coup. He believed his hired tactical thugs were currently keeping a frail, broken old man locked securely inside a freezing wooden cabin. He believed his offshore accounts were overflowing with $10 million in stolen corporate espionage funds. He believed he was utterly untouchable. Just a few feet away from the media frenzy, Thomas and Patricia Sutton were putting on a spectacular display of newly acquired arrogance. Patricia wore a custom emerald evening gown that draped heavily over her frame, accessorized with the $55,000 diamond necklace Bradley had purchased just days ago using stolen pension funds. She held a crystal flute in one hand while using the other to dismissively wave away a passing waiter. "This vintage is completely unacceptable," Patricia sneered loudly, ensuring the nearby executives heard her sharp complaint. "I specifically told Bradley to source the Dom Perignon from the private reserve cellars. It is utterly impossible to find competent help these days." Thomas stood right beside her, swirling a glass of scotch and laughing heartily with 2 senior vice presidents of the Apex board. He was aggressively dominating the conversation loudly, bragging about his fictitious wealth to men who actually possessed real power. "Yes, Patricia and I just closed on a breathtaking beachfront estate in the Hamptons," Thomas boasted proudly, adjusting his silk pocket square. "We decided we needed a proper sanctuary to host our high society colleagues away from the noise of the city. Bradley has been managing our family trust fund with absolute genius. The entire family is simply thriving in this new economic climate. They were parading around the ballroom like untouchable royalty, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire existence was currently mortgaged on a phantom credit extension built entirely on federal wire fraud." Camille stood silently at Bradley's left side. She wore the sleek, elegant black designer dress he had explicitly ordered her to wear, looking exactly like the perfect, submissive corporate wife he demanded for his public image. But beneath the expensive silk, her posture was rigid with lethal anticipation. Every single muscle in her body was tightly coiled. Bradley wrapped his arm possessively around her waist, his fingers digging slightly into her side to ensure she maintained her bright, artificial smile for the flashing cameras. "Can you feel it, Camille?" Bradley whispered directly into her ear, his breath hot and reeking of expensive scotch. "This is the exact moment we make history. By midnight, I will have absolute unchecked control over this entire empire. Your pathetic father is probably sitting in the dark right now, completely helpless, waiting for the transport van to drag him to the psychiatric ward where he belongs. He is entirely out of our way. You never have to worry about his embarrassing little episodes ruining our reputation ever again." Camille did not flinch. She did not shed a single tear for the brutal cruelty in his voice. She turned her head slightly and looked directly into her husband's eyes. Her gaze was as cold and sharp as shattered glass. "It is certainly a night that no one in this room will ever forget, Bradley," she replied smoothly, her voice betraying absolutely none of the venom coursing through her veins. "You are going to get exactly what you deserve tonight." Bradley smiled a wide, brilliant smile, completely misinterpreting her lethal promise as total broken submission. He kissed her cheek for the cameras, entirely unaware that he was embracing his own executioner. Every single extravagant detail in that massive ballroom was a direct testament to Bradley's fatal hubris. He had authorized an additional $150,000 non-refundable deposit to upgrade the event catering and the floral arrangements. He utilized the frozen offshore accounts that Jonathan had already flagged and secured. He was unknowingly financing this entire spectacle with a counterfeit financial lifeline provided by the very man he was actively trying to destroy. He had no idea that the hotel management was currently processing his elite black card through a temporary, heavily monitored credit extension directly approved by my private banker. Bradley spotted Richard Sterling, the oldest and most skeptical member of the board of directors, standing near a towering ice sculpture. Bradley immediately abandoned Camille's side and marched over to the senior board member, his massive ego demanding immediate validation. "Richard, I hope you are enjoying the evening," Bradley announced loudly, ensuring several other executives could hear his confident tone. "I trust you are ready for my keynote address. I told you during the virtual meeting that I would secure the founder's legal surrender, and I am a man who always delivers on his promises. I hold the signed proxy mandate right here in my breast pocket. The era of the ghost is officially over." Richard sipped his drink, his expression neutral and deeply cautious. He was a veteran of corporate warfare, and he recognized reckless arrogance when he saw it. "We will see," Bradley Richard replied dryly. "The board requires absolute, undeniable proof of cognitive failure and a legally verified signature before we authorize any executive dilution. You cannot conquer an empire with a simple piece of paper." Bradley simply smirked, patting his tailored velvet jacket with supreme confidence. "You will have your undeniable proof in exactly 10 minutes, Richard. Prepare to vote." The heavy golden chimes of the grand clock echoed through the venue, signaling the beginning of the main event. The ambient classical music faded into complete silence. The low murmur of hundreds of elite guests gradually quieted down as the stage lights intensified, focusing a brilliant, blinding white spotlight onto the grand mahogany podium at the front of the room. Bradley Sutton confidently adjusted his jacket, squared his broad shoulders, and walked up the carpeted stairs. He moved with the aggressive swagger of a king ascending his rightful throne. He stepped up to the microphone, looking out over the vast sea of wealthy investors, powerful board members, and flashing industry media cameras. He took a deep, triumphant breath, preparing to deliver the speech that would legally erase the anonymous founder and cement his hostile corporate takeover. He reached into his inner pocket, his fingers brushing against the forged medical proxy he believed held the ultimate power. The entire room waited in breathless, absolute silence. Bradley opened his mouth to speak his first word of victory. But before a single sound could leave his lips, the massive 30-foot-tall oak double doors at the absolute rear of the grand ballroom slammed open with a deafening, thunderous crash. The heavy oak doors hit the marble walls with a concussive blast that echoed like a gunshot through the cavernous ballroom. The sophisticated string quartet stopped playing instantly. A collective gasp rippled through the sea of elite investors and corporate executives. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. The blinding white spotlight that had been illuminating Bradley Sutton at the podium suddenly swung to the back of the hall, cutting through the shadows and landing directly on me. I did not shuffle. I did not look confused. I walked through the threshold with the heavy, undeniable posture of a conquering king reclaiming his stolen throne. I was no longer the frail old man in a faded flannel shirt and scuffed work boots. I wore a midnight black custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that cost $15,000. A crisp, brilliantly white silk shirt rested beneath my jacket, fastened at the wrists with solid platinum cufflinks. My shoes were polished to a mirror finish, striking the marble floor with a slow, methodical, and terrifying rhythm. I radiated absolute lethal authority. Flanking me on my right was Jonathan Pierce, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit and carrying a thick leather-bound portfolio containing the unvarnished truth of the Apex Empire. Flanking me on my left and fanning out into the ballroom with terrifying tactical precision was Roman and his elite corporate security team. They wore unmarked black suits, their earpieces glowing faintly in the dim light. Within 5 seconds of crossing the threshold, Roman's men had silently secured every exit, blocked the service doors, and taken absolute control of the perimeter. They moved like shadows, locking the room down before the wealthy guests even understood they were trapped. At the front of the room, standing at the grand mahogany podium, Bradley froze. His hand was still reaching into his velvet jacket for the forged medical proxy. The arrogant, triumphant smile completely melted off his face, replaced by a mask of sheer, paralyzing horror. His jaw went slack. His eyes widened to the point of tearing. He was staring at a ghost. His brain simply could not process the data in front of him. He firmly believed his hired street thugs had me locked inside a freezing wooden cabin. He believed I was a broken, heavily medicated blue-collar worker terrified of his own shadow. Instead, I was advancing down the center aisle of the Waldorf Astoria backed by a private army. Before I could reach the halfway point of the massive ballroom, Thomas and Patricia Sutton broke through the crowd. They were absolutely furious, completely misreading the situation with their trademark breathtaking ignorance. Patricia marched forward in her emerald gown, her face flushed with indignant rage. The $55,000 stolen diamond necklace sparkled brightly against her chest. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face, her voice shrieking over the stunned silence of the room. "Security!" Patricia screamed frantically, waving her hands at the hotel staff. "Get this filthy old man out of here immediately!" How did he even get past the front desk? He is dangerously unstable. He belongs in a psychiatric ward. Thomas stepped aggressively into my path, puffing out his chest and trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "Garrett, you have made a massive mistake coming here." Thomas snarled, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. "Bradley holds your legal medical proxy. You are completely incompetent. I will personally call the police and have you dragged out of here in a straitjacket. You are ruining my son's most important night." I did not stop walking. I did not even blink. I did not dignify their pathetic existence with a single word or a sideways glance. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Bradley, who was currently trembling behind the microphone. As Thomas reached out to grab my shoulder, Roman stepped forward like a phantom. The former military commander did not draw a weapon or raise his voice. He simply grabbed Thomas by the wrist, twisted his arm with brutal, calculated efficiency, and forced the larger man to his knees in a fraction of a second. Thomas let out a sharp cry of pain, his expensive scotch spilling across the pristine marble floor. Two of Roman's tactical operators instantly flanked Patricia, forcing her to step back behind the velvet ropes. They did not speak a single word. Their cold, silent menace completely suffocated her arrogant shrieks. Patricia stared at the heavily armed men, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. She suddenly realized that her fake high society status meant absolutely nothing against real, tangible power. I continued my march down the center aisle. The crowd of billionaires, politicians, and corporate elites parted like the Red Sea. They stepped back, giving me a wide berth, their eyes darting between my bespoke suit and the tactical security force securing the room. Then the true hierarchy of the corporate world finally revealed itself. Richard Sterling, the oldest, wealthiest, and most ruthless veteran on the Apex Board of Directors, was sitting at the premier VIP table near the stage. He had been a partner of mine since the very beginning, 30 years ago. He had not seen my face in over a decade since I retreated to the shadows to operate the company anonymously. But a man does not forget the architect of his fortune. Richard slowly stood up from his chair. He buttoned his tailored jacket with trembling hands. He stepped out from behind his table, turned to face me, and bowed his head in a deep, profound gesture of absolute reverence. "Welcome back, Mr. Cole," Richard said. His voice carried clearly through the dead silence of the ballroom. "We have awaited your return." That single respectful greeting acted as a shockwave. The domino effect was immediate and visually stunning. One by one, every single member of the Apex Board of Directors stood up from their tables. The senior vice presidents, the global logistics directors, and the elite investors all rose to their feet. They buttoned their jackets and bowed their heads. Hundreds of the most powerful financial titans in the country were standing in absolute silent respect for the man Patricia Sutton had just called a filthy old man. I walked past Thomas, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, clutching his twisted wrist. He stared up at the standing board members, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated terror. The horrifying reality of the situation finally crashed down on his hollow, debt-ridden mind. The man he had tried to bribe with a $10,000 check was the absolute king of the empire his son was trying to steal. Patricia stood frozen, clutching her stolen diamond necklace, the color completely draining from her face until she looked like a polished corpse. They were ruined, and they knew it. I reached the front of the ballroom and ascended the carpeted stairs to the main stage. My polished shoes made no sound, but my presence weighed 1,000 tons. I walked directly up to the grand mahogany podium. Bradley was physically shaking. His knuckles were white as he gripped the edges of the podium to keep his legs from collapsing. A cold sweat had broken out across his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. He looked down at the forged medical proxy he had pulled half out of his jacket pocket. He looked at the board of directors standing in reverence. He looked at Jonathan Pierce, who was standing beside me holding the thick dossier of federal wire fraud evidence. Bradley's mind completely shattered. The polished, charismatic CEO was entirely gone. Standing before me was a terrified, pathetic little boy who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar. Garrett Bradley stammered, his voice cracking into a high, desperate squeak. The microphone amplified his terror for the entire room to hear. "Garrett, what are you doing? The board, they do not understand. You are sick. You signed the proxy. I have the paper. I am in charge." I reached out and smoothly pulled the microphone away from his trembling grip. I adjusted the stand perfectly to my height. I looked out over the sea of silent, standing executives. I looked down at Thomas and Patricia, who were practically trembling on the floor. I looked at Camille, who stood off to the side of the stage in her elegant black dress, her face set in a mask of beautiful, lethal anticipation. Then I looked directly into the industry media cameras flashing at the back of the room. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said. My voice boomed through the massive speakers, rich, deep, and carrying the undeniable weight of absolute authority. "My name is Garrett Cole. Most of you know me by my corporate identifier. I am the anonymous founder, the chief architect, and the 51% majority voting shareholder of Apex Holdings. I apologize for my prolonged absence from the public eye. I trusted the daily operations of my legacy to an ambitious young man. But recently I discovered that my trust was violently misplaced." I turned my head slowly and locked eyes with Bradley. He shrank back, pressing himself against the wall of the stage as if trying to merge with the shadows. "You wanted to introduce me to the board of directors, Bradley." I stated, my tone razor-sharp and merciless. "You wanted to show them exactly who I am. Well, here I am. And I brought all of your secrets with me." Jonathan stepped forward and placed the heavy leather portfolio directly onto the mahogany podium. The trap had officially snapped shut. Bradley had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and absolutely no one left to bribe. I unclasped the portfolio, preparing to completely dismantle his entire existence in front of the world. The silence in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was so absolute, so suffocating, that you could hear the subtle electric hum of the stage lights. Hundreds of the most ruthless executives, elite investors, and financial titans in the country stood perfectly still, their eyes locked entirely on the mahogany podium. The heavy scent of imported white orchids suddenly felt suffocating, clashing violently with the razor-sharp tension dominating the room. I rested my hands on the polished edge of the podium, projecting a calm, lethal sovereignty that commanded the entire space. Next to me, Bradley Sutton's temporary paralysis finally broke. The sheer crushing reality of his public exposure triggered a frantic primal survival instinct. His meticulously crafted corporate facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He lunged forward, his face twisting into an ugly, desperate snarl, and grabbed the thick metal stem of the microphone stand. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his expensive velvet dinner jacket like a trapped animal. "This is a massive security breach," Bradley shouted into the microphone, his voice echoing frantically across the brilliant crystal chandeliers. "Security! I demand that you remove this man immediately. He is not the founder. He is a delusional, sick old man who broke into a private corporate event to extort my family." Bradley spun around to face the stunned board of directors, waving his arms wildly. His polished CEO persona completely disintegrated into a pathetic, hysterical tantrum. "Richard, do not listen to a single word he says," Bradley pleaded. his voice cracking under the intense pressure of the silent room. "This is my father-in-law, Garrett Cole. He is suffering from a severe rapid onset cognitive decline. He wanders around in the middle of the night babbling nonsense. He has completely lost touch with reality. He does not even know what year it is." Bradley reached into his inner jacket pocket with trembling, sweaty hands and pulled out the crumpled medical proxy document. He held it up like a protective shield, waving it frantically at the crowd as if it were undeniable proof of his sanity. "I have the legal paperwork right here. I am his designated medical proxy. A premier cognitive specialist evaluated him just 2 days ago and determined he is a massive physical danger to himself and others. He belongs in a highly secure psychiatric facility, not standing on this stage dictating corporate policy." He turned his frantic, bloodshot gaze toward Roman and the elite tactical security team, securing the massive oak doors at the back of the room. "You work for Apex Holdings. I am the chief executive officer of this corporation. I sign your paychecks. I am giving you a direct executive order. Apprehend this lunatic and drag him out of my ballroom right now. If you do not remove him this exact second, I will personally fire every single one of you and ensure you never work in this industry again." Roman did not even blink. The former military commander stood by the main doors, his hands clasped firmly behind his back, his posture carved from solid granite. Not a single member of the elite security force moved a muscle. They simply stared at Bradley as if he were a completely irrelevant buzzing insect. Down on the polished marble floor, Thomas Sutton suddenly found his false courage. He struggled to his feet aggressively, rubbing his twisted wrist, and pointed a trembling finger at the stage. "My son is telling the absolute truth. This man is a broke, uneducated fraud. He lives in a rotting shack in the woods. He is just trying to humiliate our family because he is bitterly jealous of our generational success. Call the police and arrest him." Patricia Sutton, standing beside her husband, chimed in with a shrill, piercing shriek. "He is a manipulative liar. He has been harassing our son and our beautiful daughter-in-law for months. Do not just stand there, throw him out into the street where he belongs." I did not raise my voice. I did not interrupt their frantic, screaming chorus. I simply stood at the mahogany podium and let them expose their profound, staggering stupidity to the entire financial elite. True power never has to shout to be heard. I watched Bradley physically unraveling on the stage, his tailored velvet suit suddenly looking like a cheap, ill-fitting costume on a frightened child. He was desperately trying to rewrite reality by yelling louder, a classic tactic of a cornered, powerless coward. I analyzed his every frantic movement with absolute icy detachment. He was clutching that forged medical document as if it were a magical talisman that could save his crumbling empire from total annihilation. He fundamentally believed that a piece of paper signed under false pretenses could override 3 decades of my ironclad corporate governance. He failed to understand a basic truth about the people in this room. The billionaires, the politicians, and the veteran board members did not respect empty titles, loud demands, or tailored suits. They respected leverage, they respected capital, and above all, they respected the man who had mercilessly generated their wealth for 30 consecutive years. I turned my head slowly and looked directly at Richard Sterling. The senior board member was watching Bradley's pathetic meltdown with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Richard knew exactly who I was, and he knew exactly what Bradley had attempted to do with his hostile stock dilution proposal. The entire board remained standing in absolute silence, forming a unified, impenetrable wall of silent loyalty to their true king. The sharp contrast between my deadly silent calm and Bradley's erratic, sweating hysteria told the captivated audience everything they needed to know. I glanced off to the side of the stage. Camille stood perfectly still in her elegant black dress. She did not look embarrassed by her husband's public collapse. She watched him burn with a cold, analytical gaze. She had fully embraced her heritage. She was a Cole, and she was watching the predator who tried to lock her in a financial cage walk willingly into his own slaughter. I stepped closer to the microphone, completely ignoring Bradley's frantic, sweating presence. "Bradley!" I said, my deep voice cutting through his shouting like a surgical blade, instantly silencing the room. "You are desperately waving a piece of paper that holds absolutely zero legal weight in any jurisdiction on this planet. You thought you were incredibly clever when you brought a bribed fake doctor to my cabin in the woods. You truly thought you could trick a confused, helpless old man into signing his entire life away. I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto his terrified, pale face. 30 years ago, when I drafted the foundational corporate charter of Apex Holdings, I anticipated that ambitious, greedy parasites like you would eventually try to infiltrate my company. I built a highly classified biometric defense mechanism directly into the bylaws. A legal transfer of executive power or a medical proxy concerning the majority shareholder requires a globally registered, highly stylized biometric signature. Bradley looked down at the document in his shaking hands, his eyes darting frantically across the ink. I intentionally scrawled a completely meaningless, illegible scribble on your little fraudulent contract, I stated coldly, ensuring every executive in the room heard my words. You were so utterly blinded by your own consuming greed that you did not even bother to verify the ink against the corporate master ledger. You are trying to conquer a billion-dollar corporation with a forged document that would not even hold up in a municipal traffic court. Bradley stared at the paper, the horrifying realization finally sinking into his hollow, debt-ridden mind. The document was completely worthless. His master plan to legally quarantine me in a psychiatric facility and steal Camille's $50 million trust fund was entirely dead. But his narcissistic delusion absolutely refused to surrender to reality. He dropped the useless medical proxy onto the carpeted stage and turned back to the microphone, his face flushed with pure venomous desperation. "It does not matter," Bradley screamed, his voice echoing violently through the grand ballroom, shattering the last remaining shred of his professional dignity. "I am still the chief executive officer of this company. I control the global logistics. I control the day-to-day operational infrastructure. You cannot just walk in here and erase my legal authority. I built the new distribution channels. The board needs me to lead them into the future." I did not smile. I did not blink. I turned to Jonathan Pierce, who stood faithfully by my side, gripping the thick, leather-bound portfolio. "Jonathan," I commanded, my voice resonating with absolute lethal finality, "open the portfolio. It is time to show our distinguished guests exactly how our chief executive officer conducts his business behind closed doors." Jonathan stepped forward. He did not simply hand me a piece of paper. He reached inside his tailored charcoal jacket and retrieved a small, heavily encrypted flash drive. He walked to the edge of the stage with brisk, purposeful strides and handed it directly to the head of my cybersecurity team. My team had already quietly bypassed the hotel's audiovisual technicians during the initial lockdown of the room. Within seconds, the ambient lighting in the grand ballroom dimmed completely. The massive 40-foot high-definition projector screens positioned directly behind the mahogany podium flared to life. A brilliant, blinding white light bathed Bradley in a harsh, unforgiving glow. He flinched visibly. He held a trembling hand up to shield his eyes as if the light itself could burn his skin. He turned around slowly to look at the towering screens. His jaw unhinged. The entire room collectively held its breath. I stood perfectly still, letting the digital execution commence. The first image to dominate the massive screens was a high-resolution projection of a certified bank ledger. It was not a standard corporate expense report. It was the highly classified internal audit of the Apex employee pension tier. I gestured toward the screen with a calm, sweeping motion. "You loudly claim you lead this company into the future, Bradley. Let us examine exactly how you finance your leadership." I spoke clearly into the microphone, my voice echoing like thunder over the dead silence of the ballroom. The screen automatically highlighted a series of 7 international wire transfers. $2.4 million routed sequentially through a fictitious shell company called Sutton Consulting Services. A collective gasp rippled through the hundreds of elite investors and executives. Stealing from a corporate operational budget is a severe crime. I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal, icy register. Stealing from the retirement funds of the working-class men and women who built this empire with their bare hands is an unforgivable sin. The slide transitioned seamlessly to the next piece of evidence. A new domestic wire transfer flashed in bright red ink. $500,000. The routing number traced directly back to a joint escrow account. Beside the undeniable financial ledger, a vibrant high-definition photograph of a sprawling beachfront mansion in the Hamptons appeared on the screen. "This is exactly where your stolen pension funds went," I announced, turning my gaze down to the marble floor where Thomas and Patricia Sutton were standing. "To fund a counterfeit aristocratic lifestyle for your parents." Thomas stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck by a heavy, blunt object. He blindly bumped into a tall cocktail table, sending crystal champagne flutes crashing to the floor. The shattering glass sounded like an explosion. Patricia clamped a trembling, manicured hand over her mouth. The heavy $55,000 diamond necklace she wore suddenly looked like a glowing, radioactive target on her chest. The elite society members surrounding them immediately stepped back in unison, creating a wide, isolating circle of pure disgust. Scorn radiated from the wealthy crowd. Nobody in that luxurious room tolerated a thief who stole from working-class pensions to buy vanity real estate. But financial theft is merely numbers printed on a page, I stated, firmly gripping the solid edges of the mahogany podium. I prefer to let the thieves speak for themselves. I gave Jonathan a slight commanding nod. The crisp, undeniable audio of Thomas Sutton's voice suddenly blasted through the state-of-the-art sound system. It was the exact recording I had captured on my front porch just days ago. We raised a brilliant son. Garrett Thomas's voice echoed horribly through the ballroom, dripping with arrogant pride. Bradley understands how to leverage massive corporate capital. He funneled massive logistical optimization dividends directly into our family trust. It was a flawless $500,000 maneuver. Patricia's shrill, condescending voice followed, immediately amplifying her profound ignorance for the entire financial world to hear. You working-class people never plan for the future. You live paycheck to paycheck, completely blind to the reality of the world. You just sit here whittling wood and waiting for a handout. The audio recording stopped. The silence that followed was absolute poison. Patricia let out a strangled, breathless squeak. Her legs completely gave out beneath her. She collapsed heavily onto the polished marble floor in her custom emerald gown, a crumpled, pathetic heap of fake prestige and overwhelming public shame. Thomas dropped to his knees right beside her, gripping the fabric of his shirt over his chest, gasping desperately for air. His face turned a dangerous mottled shade of gray. The very people they had desperately tried to impress all night were looking down at them with unadulterated revulsion. They were completely ruined. Their social standing, their financial future, and their fabricated dignity were annihilated in less than 60 seconds. I turned my attention back to Bradley. He was backed against the edge of the stage, sweating profusely, shaking his head in frantic, pathetic denial. He looked like a man standing on the tracks watching a freight train approach. "It is a deep fake." Bradley choked out his voice, a ragged, desperate whisper that the microphone barely caught. He fabricated the audio. It is a complete lie. It is a... I did not even blink. I signaled Jonathan again. The screen shifted to a new set of images. This was the ultimate killing blow. A crystal-clear, high-resolution photograph illuminated the ballroom. It showed Bradley sitting in a dim hotel lounge holding hands intimately across the table with Victoria Vance. She wore her signature tailored crimson suit. Between them sat a thick manila folder bearing the highly classified Apex corporate seal. A low, dangerous rumble instantly rose from the board of directors sitting at the front tables. Richard Sterling took an aggressive step forward, his eyes burning with intense, unbridled corporate fury. He recognized the Horizon Logistics executive immediately. "You are not merely a domestic thief, Bradley," I declared, my voice slicing sharply through the rising anger of the crowd. "You are a corporate traitor. You arranged to sell the proprietary source code for our automated distribution algorithm to our biggest global competitor for a $10 million bribe." The screen transitioned one final time. It played the high-definition video captured by my private investigator. Bradley and Victoria Vance stood together on a hotel balcony. They shared a passionate, undeniable kiss in broad daylight. The video then cut to the crystal-clear audio recording captured covertly at their lounge table. The complete schematic for the automated distribution algorithm is in that folder. Victoria Bradley's own voice echoed through the ballroom, dripping with arrogant treason. "If Horizon Logistics implements this architecture first, you will completely obliterate our market share by December." The entire board of directors erupted in sheer explosive outrage. Richard Sterling slammed his fist violently down onto his VIP table. The senior executives who had respected Bradley just moments ago were now glaring at him with pure, murderous intent. Selling classified trade secrets was the ultimate unforgivable corporate sin. He had not just betrayed me. He had actively jeopardized the fortunes of every single powerful investor standing in that room. Bradley was entirely broken. His legs buckled and he fell heavily to his knees on the carpeted stage. He wrapped his arms around his own torso, rocking back and forth in a state of total psychological collapse. His master plan to conquer a billion-dollar empire had resulted in his complete broadcasted destruction. The $10 million offshore account was frozen by federal authorities. The medical proxy he tried to weaponize was utterly worthless. His parents were destroyed on the floor below him. He had absolutely nothing left in his arsenal. The invisible walls he built around himself were crashing down, and the harsh white spotlight exposed every single one of his sins to the world. In a final pathetic act of sheer desperation, Bradley looked away from the glaring screens and the furious crowd. He turned his tear-streaked face toward the side of the stage. He looked directly at Camille. She stood perfectly upright in her elegant black dress. She had watched his entire world burn to ash without shedding a single tear. Bradley scrambled on his hands and knees across the stage toward her. He reached out with trembling, sweaty hands, begging the very woman he had mentally abused and financially locked out just days ago. He was desperately seeking a lifeline. He was about to find a guillotine. Bradley dragged his heavy knees across the carpeted stage, leaving a dark, sweaty trail in his wake. He reached out with slick, trembling hands and desperately grabbed the hem of Camille's elegant black designer dress. The blinding white flashes of a dozen industry cameras fired in rapid succession, capturing the exact moment the arrogant chief executive officer was reduced to a weeping, groveling parasite. His bespoke velvet dinner jacket was completely ruined by his own nervous sweat clinging awkwardly to his shaking frame. He looked up at my daughter with wide, bloodshot eyes. His face was contorted in a pathetic display of manufactured agony. He was a man who had spent his entire life manipulating optics, and now he was attempting to direct his final desperate scene. "Camille, please!" Bradley sobbed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, grating whine that echoed over the dead silence of the ballroom. "You have to tell them this is a lie. Tell your father to stop this right now. Tell the board of directors that Victoria means absolutely nothing to me. It was just a stupid, meaningless mistake. I was under so much immense pressure to provide for our future. I did it all for us. I love you. We are partners. Please, Camille, you have to save our marriage." Camille did not step back. She did not flinch away from his desperate, grasping hands. She simply stood her ground, looking down at the man she had loved for years. The deep, warm compassion that made her a brilliant pediatrician was entirely absent from her face. She raised her right hand and gave a sharp, commanding signal to the audiovisual technician standing at the back of the room. A crisp, clear microphone lowered smoothly from the ceiling rig, stopping directly in front of her. She did not need me to defend her. She was ready to deliver the killing blow herself. "Save our marriage," Camille repeated. Her voice was steady, resonant and colder than the brutal winter storm raging outside the hotel windows. Every single powerful executive and elite investor in the room hung on to her every word. "Do you mean the marriage you actively used as a corporate stepping stone, Bradley? Or do you mean the marriage where you maliciously froze my personal bank accounts while I was trying to buy emergency asthma medication for a sick infant at the hospital?" Bradley gasped. His sweaty hands slipped from the expensive fabric of her dress. He tried to scramble backward, his eyes darting frantically around the stage, suddenly realizing she was not going to play the role of the submissive, loyal corporate wife. He had severely miscalculated his control over her. "You stood in our dining room and physically shoved my elderly father against a wall," Camille declared, her words striking him like physical blows. "You actively locked me out of my own hard-earned finances to force me into silent submission. You bought a corporate spy a $55,000 diamond necklace using the sacred retirement funds of the working-class men and women who built this empire. You are not a partner, Bradley. You are a highly manipulative financial predator who thought you found an easy, trusting victim to exploit. I watched my daughter from my position at the mahogany podium. A profound, overwhelming sense of pride anchored me heavily to the floorboards. For years, I had secretly worried that the massive wealth I accumulated would soften her. I worried that growing up with a massive, invisible financial safety net would make her vulnerable to the ruthless wolves of the corporate world. I had intervened with the board of directors to grant Bradley the corner office solely because I thought I needed to shield her from the harsh realities of life. I was completely wrong. Camille did not need me to protect her. The fierce blood running through her veins was the exact same fire that allowed me to build a billion-dollar empire from a single rusty truck. She had endured his intense emotional abuse, his cruel gaslighting, and his aggressive financial manipulation. But instead of breaking under the pressure, she had forged herself into an unbreakable weapon. Down on the polished marble floor, Patricia Sutton suddenly let out a loud, theatrical wail, desperately trying to divert the crushing public attention away from her ruined son. She reached her hands up toward the stage, her custom emerald gown crumpled and ruined, begging Camille for unearned mercy. "Camille, sweetheart, you must forgive him." Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing terribly through the high ceilings. "He is your husband. Family must stick together through thick and thin. Do not let your bitter father destroy our beautiful family over a simple misunderstanding." Camille did not even grant Patricia the dignity of a downward glance. She kept her piercing, analytical gaze locked entirely on Bradley, who was now trembling violently on the stage floor. "You really thought you outsmarted everyone in this room, Bradley?" Camille continued, her voice effortlessly, slicing through Patricia's pathetic, noisy sobbing. "You spent the last 6 months aggressively trying to consolidate my private trust fund into a joint corporate account. You deeply believed my father was just a clueless, uneducated old man who set up a modest middle-class savings account for his little girl. You wanted to drain it dry to cover the tracks of your massive corporate espionage and your gambling with federal laws. But you fundamentally misunderstood the legal architecture of my family." Jonathan Pierce stepped forward from my side. The sharp, ruthless corporate attorney unbuttoned his tailored charcoal suit jacket and retrieved a thick, legally bound manila envelope from his inner pocket. He walked across the wide stage with measured, predatory steps and handed the envelope directly to my daughter. The entire board of directors watched in absolute, captivated silence. Camille took the heavy envelope and held it up for the entire ballroom to see. "When we got married, you aggressively insisted we sign a standard prenuptial agreement," she stated clearly. "You wanted to protect your fabricated future corporate earnings from me. You were so utterly obsessed with your own manufactured potential and your blinding arrogance that you did not even bother to have your cheap, incompetent lawyers read the addendums my father's legal team attached to the back of the contract." Bradley's eyes darted frantically to the manila envelope. The remaining color completely drained from his face as the lethal reality of his legal situation began to dawn on him. He swallowed hard, his throat making a dry, clicking sound. "The trust fund you actively tried to steal holds over $50 million in highly diversified global assets," Camille stated loudly, ensuring the flashing industry cameras captured the exact moment Bradley's soul left his body. "And the specific addendum you carelessly signed without reading contains a highly aggressive, strictly enforced infidelity and corporate fraud clause. By engaging in heavily documented adultery and severe federal wire fraud, you have legally permanently forfeited any and all rights to marital support, joint property, and shared liquid assets." Camille pulled a thick stack of legal documents from the manila envelope. She did not hand them to him gently. She threw the heavy stack of crisp white papers directly into his face. The documents scattered violently across the carpeted stage, raining down over his trembling shoulders and covering his knees. "These are your official divorce papers," Bradley Camille declared with absolute lethal finality. "They have already been aggressively expedited and filed with the state Supreme Court. You are hereby stripped of every single dime, every shared asset, and every ounce of legal protection you incorrectly thought you possessed. You are walking out of this hotel with exactly what you brought into our marriage. Absolutely nothing." The entire grand ballroom erupted. The elite board members shouted in furious vocal agreement. Camera flashes strobed like a violent lightning storm, immortalizing the spectacular, deeply public annihilation of the corrupt CEO. Bradley Sutton collapsed entirely, pressing his face directly into the carpet, sobbing uncontrollably as the scattered divorce papers mocked his completely ruined existence. He was utterly defeated. He had lost his lucrative career, his corporate mistress, his fake high society fortune, and the only woman who had ever genuinely loved him. Suddenly, the shrill, piercing wail of multiple police sirens pierced the heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom. The flashing red and blue lights reflected wildly against the tall, elegant glass windows of the Waldorf Astoria. The final, inescapable phase of my execution strategy had officially arrived. The wailing sirens outside the Waldorf Astoria abruptly cut out, replaced immediately by the heavy, coordinated thud of tactical boots marching through the grand lobby. The massive oak doors at the rear of the ballroom, still unguarded after Roman's security team stepped aside, were pushed open with sheer, uncompromising federal authority. A dozen agents wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI emblazoned across their backs swarmed into the extravagant space. They were accompanied by armed officers from the Financial Crimes Division. The air in the room instantly dropped another 10 degrees. The elite guests, billionaires, and board members who had just witnessed a brutal corporate slaughter now pressed themselves tightly against the silk-lined walls, creating a wide, unobstructed path down the center aisle. No one dared to speak. No one dared to interfere with the crushing, inescapable machinery of the United States justice system. The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing man with a severely clipped haircut and a face carved from stone, marched directly toward the stage. His eyes were locked entirely on the pathetic, weeping figure of Bradley Sutton, who was still kneeling among the scattered divorce papers. The agent did not hesitate. He ascended the carpeted stairs in 3 quick strides, grabbed Bradley roughly by the collar of his ruined velvet jacket, and hauled him forcefully to his feet. Bradley let out a sharp, undignified yelp, his legs trembling so violently they could barely support his own weight. Bradley Sutton, the lead agent, announced, his voice booming over the dead silence of the ballroom without the need for a microphone. "You are under arrest for severe federal wire fraud, international money laundering, grand embezzlement, and corporate espionage." The heavy metallic snap of steel handcuffs echoed sharply across the stage as the agent violently pulled Bradley's arms behind his back. The lock engaged with a cold, definitive click. Bradley thrashed weakly against the agent's iron grip, his face completely pale and slick with panicked sweat. "This is a massive mistake," Bradley choked out, spitting the words in a frantic, breathy panic. "I am the chief executive officer of this company. I have the legal authority to move capital. You cannot do this to me. Garrett set me up. He forged the ledgers. He is a crazy old man." The lead agent did not even grant Bradley the dignity of a response. He simply tightened his grip on the steel chain connecting the handcuffs and shoved the ruined man forward. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited in a flat, bored, robotic tone. "I highly suggest you start using it immediately, Mr. Sutton. We already have the offshore routing numbers and the recorded confessions from your accomplice at Horizon Logistics. Victoria Vance was taken into federal custody 20 minutes ago while trying to board a private jet to Zurich." Bradley stopped struggling entirely. The mention of his corporate mistress being intercepted and arrested was the absolute final blow. His knees buckled and 2 junior agents had to physically support his dead weight to keep him from collapsing onto the carpet. His entire, fabricated empire was totally permanently annihilated. He turned his head frantically, looking for any sign of sympathy. He looked at Camille, his eyes begging for salvation. Camille simply turned her back on him, refusing to offer even a fraction of a second of pity. I stood at the mahogany podium and watched the clinical, highly efficient takedown with absolute icy detachment. I did not smile. I did not gloat. True power is exercised without emotion. It is a precise surgical strike that removes the cancer without damaging the host body. Bradley had aggressively courted his own destruction through unbridled greed and breathtaking arrogance. I simply provided the stage and the blinding spotlight. Jonathan Pierce stepped forward, completely unbothered by the federal raid happening inches away from him. He calmly handed a sealed, encrypted hard drive to the lead agent. This drive contains the unvarnished, mirrored financial ledgers, the private investigator's surveillance logs, and the explicit audio confessions regarding the stolen pension funds, Jonathan stated with crisp, lethal professionalism. The Securities and Exchange Commission has already verified the digital signatures. The offshore accounts are fully frozen and currently waiting for federal seizure. The lead agent took the drive and nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce. The federal prosecutor will be in touch tomorrow morning to process the corporate indemnities." Down on the polished marble floor, Thomas and Patricia Sutton were desperately attempting to execute a pathetic silent escape. They were crawling along the edge of the velvet ropes, trying to slip out through a side service door while the FBI was focused on the stage. Their false high society prestige had completely evaporated, leaving them looking like terrified rats fleeing a sinking ship. They did not make it far. 2 agents from the Financial Crimes Division stepped firmly into their path, blocking the exit with their broad shoulders. Thomas stumbled backward, raising his hands in a frantic, cowardly gesture of surrender. "We have absolutely nothing to do with this." Thomas squeaked, his face a mask of pure terror. "We are just innocent bystanders. We did not know where the money came from. Bradley acted entirely on his own. He manipulated us." Jonathan Pierce walked slowly to the edge of the stage, looking down at the groveling couple with pure, unfiltered disgust. "Actually, Thomas, you are intimately involved," Jonathan declared, his voice carrying easily over the stunned crowd. "The $500,000 down payment you proudly used to purchase your beachfront mansion in the Hamptons was flagged 48 hours ago. Because it was funded entirely by stolen, legally frozen corporate pension capital, the transaction is officially classified as a federal money laundering offense. Patricia let out a loud, breathless gasp, clutching her throat as if she were actively suffocating. Her hand instinctively flew to the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. "The Hamptons estate is ours," she shrieked, her voice cracking wildly. "We signed the deed. You cannot take our home. We are respectable people." Jonathan smiled a cold, terrifying smile. "You do not own a home, Patricia." The bank initiated an emergency foreclosure this afternoon when the escrow funds bounced violently against the federal freeze. The mansion has already been seized by the authorities. The locks are changed. Your personal belongings are currently sitting in cardboard boxes on the curb. Furthermore, because you used fraudulent phantom stock derivatives to secure the remaining mortgage, the bank is aggressively pursuing maximum criminal charges against both of you for severe bank fraud. You are utterly permanently bankrupt. You are completely homeless. One of the financial agents stepped forward and unceremoniously unclasped the $55,000 diamond necklace directly from Patricia's neck. "This was purchased with embezzled corporate funds," the agent stated coldly, dropping the glittering jewelry into a clear plastic evidence bag. "It is now property of the federal government." The sheer crushing weight of Jonathan's words physically flattened Thomas. He dropped his face into his hands and began to sob loudly, a pathetic, broken sound that echoed miserably across the marble floor. He had just thrown his own son under the bus to save himself, only to realize he was already chained to the bumper. Patricia simply stared at the ceiling, her mind completely shattered by the instant brutal evaporation of her fake aristocratic existence. The federal agents hauled them to their feet, slapping heavy steel handcuffs onto their wrists. The entire Sutton family was being marched out of the Waldorf Astoria in a synchronized, humiliating parade of criminal disgrace. I watched Bradley being dragged down the center aisle. The industry media cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every single agonizing second of his perp walk. He was a ruined, broken shell of a man, stripped of his title, his stolen wealth, his mistress, and his freedom. He looked back over his shoulder one final time, locking his bloodshot eyes with mine. I did not blink. I simply offered him a slow, dismissive nod, sealing his fate forever. As the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind the disgraced family, the grand ballroom was plunged into a stunned, breathless silence. The federal raid had swept through the room like a violent hurricane, leaving a pristine, purified atmosphere in its wake. The toxic infection that had threatened to destroy my life's work had been surgically extracted. Camille stood tall beside me, her posture radiating strength and absolute resilience. She had faced the brutal fire of betrayal and emerged entirely unbroken. She was no longer a victim trapped in a gilded cage. She was a rightful heir who had just watched her abuser face the ultimate judgment. I turned back to the mahogany podium and adjusted the microphone. I looked out over the hundreds of elite board members, wealthy investors, and seasoned executives who were still standing in absolute silent reverence. The chaos was over. The theater of arrogance had officially closed its curtains. It was time to restore order, protect the hardworking families who depended on my company, and rebuild the empire on a foundation of absolute, unbreakable truth. I looked out over the hundreds of elite board members, wealthy investors, and seasoned executives who were still standing in absolute silent reverence. The chaos was finally over. The theater of arrogance had officially closed its curtains. It was time to restore order, protect the hard-working families who depended on my company, and rebuild the empire on a foundation of absolute, unbreakable truth. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice perfectly steady and echoing across the vast ballroom. Apex Holdings was built on the sweat, blood, and dedication of working-class people. Tonight, a parasite attempted to steal their future and sell our innovations to the highest bidder. I assure you the threat has been entirely neutralized. Every single cent of the employee pension tier has been fully recovered and secured in a federal trust. Our proprietary automated distribution algorithm remains safely in our vault. A wave of profound collective relief swept through the massive crowd. Richard Sterling nodded deeply from the front row, a gesture of absolute corporate solidarity. Furthermore, I continued gesturing to the strong, brilliant woman standing tall beside me. Effective immediately, the board of directors will formally recognize Camille Cole as the new Chief Executive Officer of Apex Solutions. She possesses the unshakable integrity, the fierce intellect, and the iron will required to lead this corporation into the next century. She has proven her strength under the most brutal fire imaginable. The grand ballroom erupted in a deafening, unanimous standing ovation. The applause shook the crystal chandeliers. Camille did not shrink from the overwhelming noise. She stood with her head held high, accepting the immense mantle of leadership, not as a given gift, but as a birthright she had earned through sheer survival. She looked out at the sea of executives, no longer a victim of a manipulative husband, but the undisputed queen of a billion-dollar empire. 6 months have passed since that spectacular night of reckoning at the Waldorf Astoria. The justice system moves slowly, but it moves with crushing, inescapable weight when fueled by undeniable, airtight evidence. Bradley Sutton did not get a quiet plea deal. Jonathan Pierce made absolutely sure the federal prosecutors pursued the maximum possible penalties for every single charge. Bradley was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for severe wire fraud, corporate espionage, and grand embezzlement. He traded his bespoke velvet dinner jackets and custom silk ties for a standard-issue coarse orange jumpsuit. There are no luxury corner offices in federal prison. There are no elite private caterers, no vintage French champagnes, and no wealthy investors to impress. He spends his days scrubbing concrete floors in the prison cafeteria, entirely stripped of his fake charm, his stolen wealth, and his massively bloated ego. He is just a generic identification number in the federal system, entirely forgotten by the high society corporate world he so desperately tried to conquer. He has absolutely nothing left but the agonizing memory of the night he threw his entire life away. His parents, Thomas and Patricia Sutton, suffered a fate that to them is arguably far worse than a prison cell. They were heavily convicted of severe bank fraud and accessory to money laundering. They narrowly avoided federal jail time only by aggressively cooperating with investigators and testifying against their own son in open court. However, the judge slapped them with massive, insurmountable financial restitution orders. Their fake aristocratic lifestyle was permanently, brutally annihilated. Today, Thomas and Patricia live in a cramped, decaying one-bedroom apartment in a noisy industrial suburb miles away from the elite neighborhoods they used to frequent. Thomas, the man who once flashed a bulky gold watch and boasted about his phantom investments, now works as a night shift cashier at a local gas station. He spends his nights ringing up cheap coffee and scanning lottery tickets behind a wall of bulletproof glass. Patricia, the woman who scoffed at my flannel shirt and demanded private reserve champagne at the finest French restaurants, now works as a part-time housekeeper for a budget motel off the interstate. She spends her days scrubbing public toilets, vacuuming dirty carpets, and changing stained bedsheets to pay off the staggering legal debt hanging permanently over their heads. They have no country club memberships, no designer emerald gowns, and absolutely no pride left. They spend their miserable evenings screaming at each other in their tiny kitchen, bitterly blaming one another for raising a greedy, incompetent son. They hit absolute rock bottom and they are never climbing out. Back in the gleaming glass towers of the city, Camille is thriving beyond all expectations. She officially took the reins as chief executive officer, and she has proven to be a far more lethal and effective corporate titan than Bradley ever dreamed of being. She successfully oversaw the global rollout of the automated distribution algorithm, skyrocketing our market share and entirely neutralizing Horizon Logistics. Victoria Vance Bradley's former mistress and co-conspirator is currently serving a 10-year federal sentence for corporate espionage, her career permanently destroyed. Camille did not just focus on profit margins and expansion. Her very first executive mandate was to heavily reinforce the employee pension tier, matching the recovered funds with a massive private corporate grant to ensure no worker would ever face financial instability again. She blends the deep compassion of her medical background with ruthless, brilliant corporate efficiency. She completely shed the trauma of her abusive marriage. She walks into the boardroom with absolute terrifying confidence, commanding the immediate respect of seasoned billionaires and veteran executives. She learned the hardest lesson a person can learn about power, greed, and trust, and she forged that intense pain into an impenetrable suit of armor. She is my daughter, and she is magnificent. As for me, I did not stay in the corporate skyscrapers. I did not keep the $15,000 Tom Ford suit. I donated it to a charity auction the very next week. I returned to my quiet sanctuary, my wooden cabin by the lake surrounded by the dense, towering pine trees and the absolute peace of nature. I am sitting on my front porch right now. I am wearing my faded flannel shirt, my scuffed work boots, and a comfortable pair of worn denim jeans. I am whittling a piece of fallen pine with my carving knife. The air is crisp, carrying the fresh, clean scent of pine needles and open water. My rusty 2004 Ford truck is parked securely in the gravel driveway right where it belongs. To the casual observer, to the passing stranger, I am just a quiet, working-class old man enjoying his simple retirement. I do not need a golden crown to know I am a king. I do not need a glass boardroom to exercise my authority. True wealth is never measured by the size of the diamond around your neck or the price tag on your dinner jacket. True wealth is the absolute quiet freedom to protect the people you love. It is the invisible power to crush those who mistake your humility for weakness. Bradley and his arrogant family looked at my simple life and saw a vulnerable, ignorant victim. They measured my worth by the clothes I wore and the vehicle I drove. They learned at the cost of their entire existence that the most dangerous man in the room is never the one shouting for attention. The most dangerous man is the one watching in absolute silence, holding the keys to the entire empire in the pocket of a worn-out flannel shirt. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let us meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I am looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There is so much more on my channel. Do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect. Looking back at the wreckage of Bradley's ambition, there is one final truth that stands above the rest. A title printed on a glass door does not make you a leader, and stealing someone else's foundation will never give you solid ground to stand on. Real respect cannot be bought with embezzled funds or demanded through intimidation. It must be earned through integrity, patience, and silent sacrifice. Those who build their lives on the illusion of superiority will always collapse when faced with genuine strength. Never mistake a person's chosen simplicity for ignorance, because the quietest observer often holds the heaviest hammer. Share your own stories of standing up to toxic arrogance in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe for more satisfying tales of ultimate justice.